For centuries, humanity has searched for answers to questions that refuse to fade into history. Across the world, strange events have left behind clues that no one has ever fully explained. Ships discovered drifting with no crew. Entire expeditions vanishing without a trace. Ancient structures built with a precision that still puzzles modern science. Some of these mysteries are buried deep beneath the ocean. Others lie hidden in forgotten ruins, deserts, or frozen mountain passes. And despite centuries of investigation, the truth behind them remains just out of reach. But what if the answers have been there all along, waiting to be uncovered? Tonight, we're exploring some of the most baffling and haunting mysteries ever recorded in human history. So dim the lights, get comfortable, and join us as we uncover 3 hours of history's strangest and most unsettling mysteries. Let's begin. The vanishing of Rome's Ninth Legion. In the cold, mist-covered lands of ancient Britain, there is a mystery that has haunted historians for nearly 2,000 years. It is the story of an entire Roman army unit that simply disappeared. No final battle, no clear record of defeat, no mass graves, just silence. To understand this mystery, we must travel back to a time when the Roman Empire stood at the height of its power. Nearly 2,000 years ago, Rome ruled vast territories stretching across Europe, North Africa, and parts of the Middle East. Its legions were the most disciplined and feared fighting force the ancient world had ever seen. Each Roman legion contained around 5,000 highly trained soldiers. These men were not just warriors. They were engineers, builders, and conquerors who carried the power of Rome wherever they marched. One of these units was known as the Ninth Legion, Legio IX Hispana. It was one of Rome's most experienced military forces, having fought in brutal campaigns across the empire. By the early 2nd century, the Ninth Legion had been stationed in Britain, a distant and often hostile province on the edge of the Roman world. Britain was nothing like Rome. Instead of warm Mediterranean climates and bustling cities, Roman soldiers found themselves surrounded by cold rain, thick forests, and rugged landscapes. Even more dangerous were the tribes who lived there. The local Celtic tribes fiercely resisted Roman control. They knew the land better than the invading soldiers and often used guerrilla tactics to attack Roman forces. For the Roman Empire, holding Britain was never easy. And in the north, beyond the frontier, the situation was even more dangerous. The lands that would later become Scotland were home to fierce tribal groups who refused to submit to Roman rule. These tribes were determined to keep their independence, and they were willing to fight for it. Around the early 2nd century AD, the Ninth Legion was stationed in the northern region of Roman Britain. Historical records show that they had a base in the city of Eboracum, known today as York. From there, they helped maintain control of the northern frontier. But something happened. Something so unusual that it left historians confused for centuries. After a certain point in history, the Ninth Legion simply vanishes from the records. For a military unit as large and important as a Roman legion, this is extremely strange. The Roman Empire was famous for its detailed record-keeping. Battles were documented. Troop movements were recorded. Victories and defeats were carefully written into official histories. Yet somehow an entire legion disappears. No clear explanation, no official report, just nothing. The last reliable evidence of the Ninth Legion places them in Britain during the early 2nd century. And then, sometime after that, the historical trail grows cold. Later Roman records mention other legions stationed across the empire. But the Ninth Legion is never listed again. It's as if the unit simply stopped existing. For historians, this raised an obvious and troubling question. What happened to the Ninth Legion? One theory suggests that the legion may have been destroyed in battle somewhere in northern Britain. At the time, the region beyond Roman control was filled with hostile tribes who constantly attacked Roman outposts. Some historians belonged to the Ninth Legion may have marched north to deal with an uprising. Perhaps they ventured too far into hostile territory. Perhaps they were ambushed. If thousands of Roman soldiers had been surrounded in unfamiliar terrain, even the disciplined Roman army might have struggled to survive. Yet this explanation has problems. If such a massive battle had taken place, we would expect to find some evidence. Ancient historians often wrote about major military disasters. The loss of an entire legion would have been a shocking event. But no Roman writer ever described such a catastrophe. Another theory suggests that the legion was simply relocated. It's possible that the Ninth Legion was transferred to another part of the empire where it was later disbanded or reorganized. Some evidence hints that Roman soldiers from the Ninth Legion may have appeared in other provinces. But even this theory leaves unanswered questions. If the Legion had been moved, why do official Roman records suddenly stop mentioning it? Why would such an experienced military unit simply vanish from the historical record? Over the years, archaeologists have tried to search for clues. Excavations in northern England have uncovered Roman forts, weapons, and artifacts, but none of them provide clear evidence of the Ninth Legion's final fate. No large battlefield has been discovered, no burial sites containing thousands of Roman soldiers, nothing that clearly explains what happened, and so the mystery remains. Some historians believe the Legion was quietly destroyed in a battle so embarrassing that Roman officials chose not to record it. Others believe the soldiers were gradually reassigned. Their legion dissolved into other units until its name disappeared. There are even more unusual ideas. Some have suggested the Ninth Legion may have been lost during an expedition into unknown territory beyond the Roman frontier, a march into lands where Roman soldiers were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and ultimately wiped out. If that happened, the survivors may never have returned to tell the story. But without evidence, these theories remain speculation. Today, the disappearance of the Ninth Legion remains one of the most fascinating military mysteries of the ancient world. Thousands of trained soldiers, an elite unit of one of history's greatest empires. And yet their final fate remains hidden somewhere in the shadows of history. Perhaps the answer lies buried beneath the forests of northern Britain, or perhaps the truth was simply lost to time. What we do know is this. At some point nearly 2,000 years ago, a Roman legion marched into history and never marched back out. The Lost Franklin Expedition. Into the frozen silence in the middle of the 19th century, during an age when explorers were racing to map every corner of the world, one expedition set out on a journey that would become one of history's most haunting mysteries. It began with confidence. With experienced sailors, advanced ships, and the backing of one of the most powerful empires on Earth. But it ended with something far stranger. A complete disappearance. No survivors. No clear explanation. Just fragments of clues scattered across one of the coldest places on the planet. This is the story of the Lost Franklin Expedition. To understand the mystery, we must first travel back to the year 1845. At the time, the British Empire was obsessed with a geographic puzzle known as the Northwest Passage. For centuries, explorers had searched for a sea route that would connect the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean through the Arctic. If such a route existed, it could dramatically shorten trade routes between Europe and Asia. Finding it would be a massive achievement, and whoever discovered it would become famous around the world. Many expeditions had already tried to find the passage. Some returned with valuable maps and discoveries. Others never returned at all. Still, the British government remained determined. In 1845, they launched what was meant to be the most advanced Arctic expedition ever attempted. The mission would be led by Sir John Franklin, a respected naval officer and experienced Arctic explorer. Franklin was 59 years old at the time, older than most explorers who attempted such dangerous journeys, but he had decades of experience and a reputation for leadership. The expedition would sail aboard two specially prepared ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror. These ships were not ordinary vessels. They had been reinforced with strong wooden hulls designed to survive crushing ice. They were equipped with steam engines to assist with navigation, and they carried enough food supplies to last for several years. In total, 129 officers and crew members joined the expedition. These men were skilled sailors, engineers, and navigators. Many believed the journey would be difficult but ultimately successful. After all, the British Navy was the most powerful naval force in the world. Surely, if anyone could conquer the Arctic, it would be them. In May of 1845, the two ships departed from England. Crowds gathered to watch them sail away. Families waved goodbye from the docks. The ships moved slowly out into the Atlantic, beginning what many believed would be a historic voyage. For a while, everything seemed to go according to plan. The expedition crossed the Atlantic and sailed into the icy waters of the Canadian Arctic. In July of that year, two whaling ships spotted the Erebus and Terror in Baffin Bay. The crews briefly spoke with Franklin and his men. The explorers appeared confident and in good spirits. They were heading west, deeper into the Arctic. That sighting would be the last confirmed time anyone saw the expedition alive. After that moment, the ships vanished. At first, no one was concerned. Arctic voyages could take years. It was expected that the expedition would be out of contact for a long time. But as the years passed, anxiety began to grow. 2 years went by, then 3, then 4. Still, there was no word. Finally, in 1848, the British government decided something was terribly wrong. They launched a series of rescue missions. Ships were sent north to search for Franklin and his crew. Explorers scoured the icy coastline. They searched islands, channels, and frozen bays. But the Arctic is vast, and the deeper the search teams traveled, the more difficult the environment became. Eventually, small clues began to appear. Some search teams discovered abandoned campsites. Others found pieces of equipment scattered along the frozen coastline, but the most disturbing discoveries were still ahead. In the years that followed, Inuit communities living in the Arctic began sharing stories with European explorers. They spoke of strange ships trapped in the ice, of starving men wandering across the frozen land, of bodies left behind in the snow. At first, many British officials dismissed these stories, but eventually, explorers began to find physical evidence that confirmed parts of the Inuit accounts. Near King William Island, searchers discovered items that had clearly belonged to Franklin's expedition. Silverware engraved with officers' names, uniform buttons, fragments of equipment. Then, in 1859, searchers found something even more important, a written message. Inside a small stone cairn on the island, investigators discovered a document left behind by the expedition. It was the only official written record explaining what had happened, and it revealed a grim truth. The note had actually been written in 2 stages. The first message, dated May 1847, reported that the expedition had spent its first winter trapped in ice. But at the time, all was still well. The ships were stuck, but the crew remained safe. However, a second message had been added later. This one told a far darker story. It revealed that Sir John Franklin had died in June 1847, and the situation had grown desperate. By April 1848, the ships had been trapped in ice for nearly 2 years. The crew had finally abandoned the vessels. The remaining survivors, 105 men, planned to march south across the frozen landscape toward safety. But the Arctic wilderness is unforgiving. The nearest known outposts were hundreds of miles away. Temperatures dropped far below freezing. Food supplies were running low, and the men were already exhausted after years trapped in ice. After leaving that message, the survivors began their desperate journey. None of them were ever seen alive again. Over time, investigators uncovered even more disturbing clues. Human remains discovered in the region showed clear signs of severe hardship. Some bones revealed evidence of scurvy, a disease caused by vitamin deficiency. Others showed something even more shocking, marks that suggested cannibalism. For many years, historians debated whether these conclusions were accurate. The idea that British naval officers had resorted to such desperate actions was difficult for Victorian society to accept. But modern forensic analysis confirmed the evidence. The men had reached a level of starvation so severe that they were forced to do whatever it took to survive. Still, the full story remained incomplete. For over 150 years, the final resting place of the 2 ships remained unknown. Then, in 2014, something remarkable happened. A Canadian search team finally located the wreck of HMS Erebus. It had been lying on the ocean floor for nearly 170 years. 2 years later, in 2016, the wreck of HMS Terror was discovered as well. The ships were found surprisingly well preserved beneath the icy water. Their cabins, equipment, and personal belongings were still inside. But even with these discoveries, many questions remain unanswered. Why had the ships become trapped in the first place? Why did the crew abandon vessels that still appeared seaworthy? And what exactly happened during those final months as the survivors struggled across the frozen wilderness? Some researchers believe lead poisoning may have contributed to the disaster. The ships carried large quantities of canned food sealed with lead solder. Over time, lead contamination could have slowly poisoned the crew, weakening both their bodies and their judgment. Others argue that the Arctic environment itself was simply too harsh. Even the best-equipped expedition might have struggled to survive years trapped in ice. Perhaps a combination of illness, starvation, and brutal weather slowly destroyed the crew. But despite all the investigations, the full story may never be known. Somewhere in the frozen Arctic landscape, many of the expedition's final moments remain buried beneath snow and ice. What we do know is this. In 1845, 129 men sailed into the Arctic wilderness, confident they would make history. Instead, they became part of one of history's greatest mysteries, a story of ambition, endurance, and tragedy. A reminder that even the most powerful explorers can be humbled by the forces of nature. And in the silent, frozen waters of the Arctic, the Erebus and Terror still rest, guarding the final secrets of the lost Franklin expedition. The Mad Gasser of Mattoon. The night the air turned poison in the late summer of 1944, in a quiet American town surrounded by cornfields and tree-lined streets, a series of strange events began that would leave an entire community terrified. The town was Mattoon, Illinois, a small Midwestern town where life moved at a calm and predictable pace. Most residents knew their neighbors. Families gathered on front porches in the evenings. Children played in the streets until the sun went down. It was the kind of place where very little ever happened. But for several weeks in September of 1944, Mattoon became the center of one of the strangest unsolved mysteries in American history, a mystery involving a strange smell, a mysterious attacker, and a gas that no one could identify. It began late on the night of August 31st. A woman named Mrs. Carney, who lived with her family in Mattoon, suddenly noticed something unusual. As she sat in her home, a strange odor drifted through the air. At first, she thought it might be something harmless, perhaps a chemical smell from nearby industry or a passing vehicle. But the smell quickly became stronger. It was described as sweet, but also sickening. Within moments, she began to feel dizzy. Her legs felt weak. Her throat burned. Then, something even stranger happened. She felt as though she could barely move, almost like her body was slowly becoming paralyzed. Alarmed, she called out for help. Her husband rushed to investigate the house and the surrounding yard. As he stepped outside, he reported seeing a shadowy figure fleeing the area. Someone had apparently been lurking outside the home, but the figure disappeared into the darkness before he could get a clear look. At the time, the incident seemed frightening but isolated. Perhaps someone had been playing a prank. Perhaps there had been some kind of chemical leak. But over the next several days, similar reports began appearing across Mattoon. Another family reported smelling a strange gas drifting through their home. Another victim described dizziness and nausea. Others complained of burning sensations in their throats and noses. Several people claimed they felt temporarily paralyzed, unable to move their arms or legs. Soon, rumors began spreading throughout the town. Something strange was happening. Someone was releasing gas into people's homes, and no one knew why. Local newspapers quickly picked up the story. They gave the mysterious figure a name, the Mad Gasser of Mattoon. According to the reports, the attacker would sneak up to houses late at night. Then, through open windows or small openings, he would release a strange gas into the home. The victims would suddenly smell something unusual. Moments later, they would begin to feel sick or disoriented. In some cases, victims said they could barely move. Others reported headaches, nausea, and burning sensations. The symptoms usually faded after a short period of time, but the fear remained, and the reports kept coming. Within days, dozens of residents were claiming they had been attacked. Some witnesses described seeing a mysterious figure dressed in dark clothing lurking near houses at night. Others claimed they heard footsteps outside their windows just before the strange smell appeared. Police quickly became involved. Officers began patrolling the streets late at night, searching for any suspicious activity. They questioned witnesses and inspected the locations where the attacks were reported, but despite their efforts, they found almost nothing. No chemical containers, no footprints, no clear evidence of any gas, and most importantly, no suspect. The more investigators searched, the stranger the case became. Victims insisted that something had happened. Their symptoms felt real, yet investigators could find no proof that a gas had actually been used. Some police officers began to suspect that the attacker might be using a homemade chemical mixture, perhaps something simple that evaporated quickly and left little evidence behind. But if that were the case, how could the attackers strike so many homes across the town without being seen? Mattoon was not a large city. People noticed unusual activity quickly. Still, the attacks seemed to continue. Night after night, new reports appeared. Residents became increasingly anxious. Some families began sleeping with windows closed despite the warm summer weather. Others stayed awake late into the night, watching their yards and streets for any suspicious movement. Many people carried flashlights or even weapons for protection. The fear had spread throughout the entire town, and the local newspapers continued reporting every new incident. But the more the story spread, the more confusing it became. Some of the reports began to contradict each other. Descriptions of the mysterious attacker varied widely. Some witnesses described a tall man wearing dark clothing. Others claimed the figure was shorter. Some said they saw a man running away. Others admitted they had seen nothing at all. Investigators also noticed something unusual about the symptoms. Many victims reported dizziness or nausea, but the symptoms were often mild and temporary. Within minutes or hours, most people felt normal again. If a powerful chemical gas had truly been used, experts expected the effects to be far more serious. Yet no one had been seriously injured. No one had been hospitalized, and medical examinations often found no clear evidence of poisoning. Eventually, some investigators began considering another possibility. What if there was no gas attacker at all? What if something else was happening? Some psychologists suggested that Mattoon might be experiencing mass hysteria. Mass hysteria is a phenomenon where fear and anxiety spread rapidly through a community. When people hear about strange events happening around them, their minds may begin interpreting ordinary sensations as signs of danger. A harmless smell, a moment of dizziness, a shadow outside a window. Suddenly, these ordinary experiences can feel like proof that something sinister is happening. Once the fear takes hold, the reports can multiply quickly. People become more alert, more nervous, more likely to interpret everyday events as something threatening. In Mattoon, this theory began to gain support. The country was in the middle of World War II. People were already living with high levels of stress and anxiety. Rumors about enemy sabotage or chemical attacks were common during the war years. Some experts believed the strange events in Mattoon might have been fueled by these fears. A few genuine incidents, perhaps involving harmless odors or household chemicals, may have triggered a wave of panic that spread throughout the town. Once the story of the mad gasser appeared in newspapers, the idea of a mysterious attacker quickly captured people's imaginations. But not everyone accepted the hysteria explanation. Many residents remained convinced that a real attacker had been stalking their streets. After all, several witnesses claimed they had seen a suspicious figure near the homes where attacks occurred, and the strange smells people reported seemed too specific to be purely imaginary. Yet, despite weeks of investigation, the police were never able to identify a suspect. No arrests were made. No chemical devices were discovered. Eventually, the reports began to slow down. The attacks became less frequent. Then, just as mysteriously as they had begun, they stopped. By the middle of September, the strange incidents in Mattoon had faded away. The town slowly returned to normal. Life resumed. People went back to their routines. But the mystery of the mad gasser remained. To this day, historians and researchers still debate what really happened during those strange weeks in 1944. Was there truly a mysterious criminal releasing gas into people's homes? Was it an elaborate prank that was never uncovered? Or was it a powerful example of how fear and rumor can spread through a community? The truth may never be known. What is certain is that for a brief moment in history, the quiet town of Mattoon became the center of a mystery that baffled investigators and frightened an entire population. And somewhere in the darkness of those late summer nights, a shadowy figure, real or imagined, slipped away without ever being identified. The Kentucky meat shower. When the sky rained flesh on a quiet afternoon in the late 19th century, in the rural countryside of Kentucky, something happened that seemed to defy the natural order of the world. There were no storms brewing in the sky, no unusual weather patterns sweeping across the region. The day began like any other, but within a few minutes, the sky above a small farming community began dropping something no one could explain. Not rain, not hail, but pieces of meat. Yes, meat. Chunks of raw flesh, some described as red and fibrous like beef, Others, pale and strange in appearance, began falling from the sky. They landed in fields. They scattered across fences. They splattered on the ground, and witnesses stood in stunned silence, trying to understand what they were seeing. To this day, the event is remembered as one of the most bizarre phenomena ever recorded in American history. It became known as the Kentucky Meat Shower. To understand how strange this event truly was, we must travel back to March 3, 1876, to a quiet area near the small settlement of Olympia Springs, Kentucky. At the time, this region was largely rural. Families lived on farms surrounded by rolling hills, thick forests, and wide open fields. Life moved slowly there. Days were filled with simple routines: tending animals, planting crops, maintaining homes. Nothing extraordinary ever seemed to happen. But on that particular afternoon, the ordinary world suddenly took a strange turn. A woman named Mrs. Allen Crouch was standing outside making soap in her yard. The sky above her appeared perfectly normal. There were no dark clouds, no thunder, just a calm afternoon. Then something unusual caught her attention. Small objects began falling from the sky. At first she may have assumed it was debris blown by the wind, but as the pieces landed around her, it became clear that these were not leaves or dust. They were pieces of meat. Witnesses later reported that the strange shower lasted only a few minutes, but during that short time, dozens, perhaps even hundreds of small pieces of flesh rained down over an area roughly the size of a football field. The pieces varied in size. Some were small fragments, others were larger chunks, several inches across. Many were described as looking like fresh meat, others appeared partially dried or stringy, and most disturbingly of all, no one could see where they were coming from. The sky above remained empty. There were no birds flying overhead, no animals, nothing that could easily explain what was happening. When the strange shower ended, residents cautiously approached the scattered pieces lying across the ground. People examined them with a mixture of curiosity and unease. At first, some believed the meat might belong to a nearby animal that had somehow been blown apart by an explosion or violent storm. But there had been no explosions, and the sky had been completely calm. Word of the strange event spread quickly through the surrounding area. Soon, curious neighbors arrived to see the strange pieces for themselves. Some people even went as far as tasting the meat in an attempt to identify what kind of animal it came from. According to newspaper reports from the time, several men claimed the meat tasted like either mutton or venison. Others insisted it resembled beef. But no one could agree. Samples were collected and eventually examined by scientists. At the time, the scientific tools available were limited, but several researchers attempted to identify the mysterious substance. One analysis suggested that the pieces might actually be lung tissue from either a horse or a human infant, a conclusion that disturbed many people who heard it. Another expert argued the meat appeared to be cartilage tissue, possibly from animals. Still others claimed it resembled muscle fibers from a mammal. In short, even scientists could not agree on what exactly had fallen from the sky. But identifying the meat was only part of the mystery. The far bigger question remained unanswered. How had it gotten there? How could meat possibly rain down from a clear sky? Over the years, several theories were proposed. One of the earliest explanations involved vultures. Some scientists suggested that a flock of vultures might have been flying overhead while carrying pieces of animal carcasses. When vultures feel threatened or frightened, they sometimes vomit their stomach contents in order to lighten their bodies and escape quickly. If a large flock of vultures had suddenly regurgitated their meals while flying over the area, it could theoretically explain why pieces of meat fell from the sky. At first, this theory seemed reasonable. Vultures were common in rural Kentucky, and they were known to feed on animal carcasses. But there were problems with the explanation. For one thing, no one reported seeing vultures overhead at the time of the event. Secondly, the quantity of meat that fell seemed unusually large. Some witnesses described the ground being covered in dozens of pieces of flesh. It seemed unlikely that a few birds could produce such a strange shower. Another theory suggested that the meat might have been lifted into the air by a powerful updraft or small tornado. In rare cases, tornadoes have been known to pick up objects, including animals, and carry them high into the sky before dropping them elsewhere. There are historical reports of fish, frogs, and even small animals falling from the sky after being caught in powerful storms. But once again, the weather conditions on that day created problems for this theory. There had been no storms, no strong winds, no evidence of tornado activity in the region. The sky had been calm and clear. Others wondered whether the event might have been a deliberate hoax. Perhaps someone had scattered pieces of meat across the area as a strange prank. But if that were the case, it would have required a significant amount of meat and careful planning. And no one ever came forward to claim responsibility. In fact, no clear evidence of human involvement was ever discovered. The mystery only grew deeper. As years passed, the Kentucky meat shower became one of the most unusual stories in American folklore. It appeared in newspapers, scientific journals, and books about strange natural phenomena. And yet, no explanation fully satisfied investigators. Modern scientists have revisited the event many times. Some researchers believe the vulture theory remains the most plausible explanation. Even though witnesses did not report seeing birds, it is possible that a flock flying at high altitude could have dropped regurgitated meat without being easily noticed. Others believe the meat might have been carried by atmospheric currents in ways we do not fully understand. Still others argue that the exact nature of the event may never be known. Records from the time are limited. Samples of the meat have long since disappeared, and many of the original witness accounts were written decades after the event occurred. What remains today is a strange historical record, a moment in time when people standing in a quiet Kentucky farmyard watched pieces of flesh fall from the sky. And for a few minutes, the ordinary laws of nature seemed to stop making sense. Imagine standing in that field, looking up at the clear sky, and seeing something impossible drifting down from above. No storm, no birds, no explanation, just silence and falling meat. Even today, nearly 150 years later, the Kentucky meat shower remains one of the most bizarre and puzzling events ever recorded. Was it a rare natural phenomenon, a misunderstood biological event, or something stranger that we still cannot fully explain? The sky above Olympia Springs eventually returned to normal. The scattered pieces of meat were collected, studied, and eventually forgotten. But the mystery itself never truly disappeared, because sometimes history leaves behind events that simply refuse to fit into our understanding of the world. And when that happens, all we can do is look back and wonder what really fell from the sky that strange afternoon in Kentucky. The vanishing of the Flannan Isles lighthouse keepers. In the winter of 1900, on a lonely island in the cold Atlantic Ocean, 3 men disappeared. Not during a battle, not during a shipwreck, but while performing one of the most routine duties imaginable. They were lighthouse keepers, men whose job was simple but essential: keep the light burning so ships could safely pass dangerous coastal waters. It was work that required discipline, patience, and long periods of isolation. Lighthouse keepers often spent weeks or months away from the mainland, surrounded only by wind, waves, and the endless rhythm of the sea. For most of them, the work was quiet, predictable. But on a remote group of rocky islands off the coast of Scotland, something happened that no one has ever fully explained. 3 experienced lighthouse keepers simply vanished. No bodies. No clear signs of violence, no obvious explanation, just an abandoned lighthouse and a mystery that continues to haunt historians more than a century later. To understand the story, we must travel to the Flannan Isles, a small and desolate group of islands located about 20 miles off the northwest coast of Scotland. The islands are harsh and rugged. Sharp cliffs rise straight from the ocean. Storms sweep across the rocks with incredible force. The sea around them is known for dangerous currents and hidden reefs. For centuries, sailors feared navigating those waters. Shipwrecks were common, and the area earned a reputation as one of the most treacherous stretches of coastline in the North Atlantic. To reduce the danger, the British government constructed a lighthouse on Eilean Moor, the largest of the Flannan Isles. The lighthouse began operating in 1899. It was a tall stone tower designed to guide ships safely through the dangerous waters. But because the island was so remote, it required a team of keepers to maintain it. 3 men were assigned to live and work there at any given time. Their duties were straightforward. They kept the light burning, maintained equipment, recorded weather conditions, and monitored the surrounding sea. At regular intervals, a supply ship would arrive to deliver food, fuel, and mail. Then it would return to the mainland. The lighthouse keepers would continue their quiet routine until the next supply visit. For the most part, life on the island was calm, lonely perhaps, but predictable. But in December of 1900, something strange happened. The first hint of trouble came from passing ships. Several vessels reported that the lighthouse appeared dark. Normally, the powerful beacon would shine across the sea every night. But for several evenings in mid-December, sailors noticed something unusual. The light wasn't visible. At first, this didn't cause immediate alarm. Bad weather sometimes made the light difficult to see. But when the scheduled supply ship approached the island on December 26th, the situation quickly became far more troubling. The ship, called the Hesperus, carried supplies and a relief keeper who was scheduled to replace one of the men stationed on the island. As the vessel approached Ilian Mo, the crew immediately noticed something strange. No one was waiting at the landing area. Normally, lighthouse keepers would be ready to receive supplies when the ship arrived, but this time the island appeared silent. The captain sounded the ship's horn. Still no response. Concerned, the relief keeper was sent ashore to investigate. As he climbed the steep path toward the lighthouse, the silence grew heavier. The island felt abandoned. When he reached the lighthouse building, he discovered something unsettling. The main door was closed, but inside, no one was there. The lighthouse was empty. The beds were unmade. The kitchen showed signs that a meal had recently been prepared. A chair had been knocked over. But the 3 lighthouse keepers were gone. There were no signs of a struggle, no signs of violence, just the quiet absence of the men who should have been there. The relief keeper quickly began searching the building. Everything appeared strangely normal, except for one important detail. The lighthouse lamp had been extinguished, and outside, the storm gear that keepers normally wore when venturing outdoors was missing from the rack. It seemed the men had left the lighthouse during bad weather. But why? And where had they gone? Investigators soon began examining the rest of the island. The cliffs around the lighthouse showed signs of recent storm damage. Heavy equipment used to secure supply crates had been displaced. Iron railings were bent. Boxes had been smashed open by waves. It appeared that a powerful storm had struck the island shortly before the supply ship arrived. But even so, the disappearance of all 3 men remained difficult to explain. Normally, lighthouse protocol required at least one keeper to remain inside at all times. The light could not be left unattended. Yet somehow, all 3 men had apparently gone outside together. The question was, why? Investigators then turned their attention to the lighthouse logbook. The logbook was used to record daily activities and weather conditions. The final entries were deeply unsettling. According to the log, a violent storm had struck the island several days earlier. One entry described winds so powerful that they shook the lighthouse. Another entry claimed that one of the men had been unusually quiet and nervous during the storm. But perhaps the strangest detail was the date. Weather records from nearby locations later revealed that no major storm had been recorded in the area on those days. In fact, the weather had reportedly been relatively calm. Why would the lighthouse keepers describe such terrifying conditions in their logbook? Some investigators wondered whether the storm had been more intense around the isolated island than in nearby areas. Others believed the men may have simply exaggerated the weather in their reports. But the mystery of the logbook only added to the confusion. Eventually, the official investigation concluded that the men had most likely been swept into the sea by a powerful wave. The theory suggested that 2 of the keepers had gone down to the shoreline to secure equipment during rough weather. When a large wave struck the rocks, one of the men may have been knocked into the water. The 3rd keeper, seeing the accident, may have rushed outside to help. All 3 men could then have been swept away by the violent sea. It was a tragic possibility, but even this explanation left several unanswered questions. Why would all 3 men leave the lighthouse unattended? Why would experienced keepers risk approaching dangerous cliffs during a storm? And why did the logbook describe weather conditions that didn't seem to match the official records? Over the years, many alternative theories have emerged. Some people suggested the men may have been caught in an unexpected rogue wave, a massive wall of water capable of striking without warning. Others speculated about conflict among the keepers, suggesting that an argument might have led to violence. There were even rumors of supernatural explanations. Local legends spoke of strange forces surrounding the islands, storing in obscene turrets, mysterious disappearances, and ancient curses, but there was never any evidence to support such claims. What remained was a silent lighthouse and an empty island. 3 men had gone to work there, and none of them had ever returned. Today, the Flannan Isles Lighthouse still stands. Its light continues to shine across the cold Atlantic waters. Ships pass safely through the same dangerous channels the keepers once watched over. But the mystery of what happened in December 1900 remains unsolved. Somewhere along those jagged cliffs, in the crashing waves below, the final moments of the 3 lighthouse keepers disappeared forever. And on stormy nights, when the wind howls across the rocks and the sea pounds against the island, it is easy to imagine the silent lighthouse standing guard over a secret that may never be fully understood. The dancing plague of 1518. When a city couldn't stop moving in the summer of 1518, something happened in the streets of a European city that seemed to defy reason. It began with a single woman. There was no music playing, no festival, no celebration. And yet she began to dance. At first, it might have seemed like nothing more than a strange moment, perhaps a person enjoying the warmth of the day, perhaps someone celebrating in her own unusual way. But this was no ordinary dance. She did not stop. For hours she continued moving through the streets, her body twisted and swayed, her feet striking the ground over and over again as if driven by some invisible force. The people watching were confused. Some laughed. Others stared in disbelief. But as the hours passed and the woman continued dancing without pause, the laughter began to fade. Something was clearly wrong. And then something even stranger happened. More people joined her. Within days, dozens of people in the city began dancing in the streets, and they could not stop. This strange event became known as the Dancing Plague of 1518, one of the most mysterious outbreaks of human behavior ever recorded. The city where it happened was Strasbourg, located along the Rhine River in what is now modern-day France. At the time, Strasbourg was part of the Holy Roman Empire, a busy trading city filled with markets, churches, and narrow cobblestone streets. Life there was difficult for many people. The early 1500s had brought years of hardship. Food shortages were common, disease was always a threat, and the population lived under constant stress from poverty and political tensions. In July of 1518, during one of the hottest summers on record, the strange dancing began. According to historical accounts, the first person affected was a woman named Frau Trophia. One morning she stepped out into the street and began dancing. At first, the movements may have seemed harmless, but she continued dancing hour after hour. She did not stop for rest. She did not stop for food. She simply danced. Witnesses reported that her expression appeared distressed rather than joyful. It was as if her body was moving against her will. For nearly 6 days, Frau Trophia continued dancing in the streets. By the end of the week, something extraordinary had happened. Other people began to dance as well. At first, it was a few individuals, then more. Soon, dozens of citizens were dancing uncontrollably in public spaces. Some staggered through the streets. Others collapsed from exhaustion, only to rise again and continue their strange movements. Within a month, the number of dancers had reportedly grown to hundreds of people, and the city authorities were completely unprepared for what was happening. The situation quickly became frightening. Many dancers suffered severe exhaustion. Some developed injuries from continuous movement. Historical records suggest that several people died from heart attacks, strokes, or complete physical exhaustion. Imagine witnessing something like this, walking through your city and seeing people dancing endlessly, unable to stop. Faces covered in sweat, bodies shaking with fatigue, and no one understanding why it was happening. Local doctors and religious leaders struggled to explain the phenomenon. Some believed the dancers had been cursed by a saint. At the time, many people believed in supernatural punishments for sin. One popular explanation involved Saint Vitus, a Christian saint who was believed to cause dancing curses if he was angered. According to this belief, People who offended St. Vitus might be forced to dance uncontrollably. Because of this belief, the strange outbreak was sometimes called St. Vitus's dance. But while superstition offered one explanation, the city officials were desperate to find a solution. At first, the authorities made a surprising decision. Instead of trying to stop the dancing, they encouraged it. City leaders believed the dancers needed to release the strange energy building inside them. If they continued dancing long enough, perhaps the condition would eventually burn itself out. So they organized public dancing spaces. They even hired musicians to play music for the dancers. Stages were built in the streets. Professional dancers were brought in to help guide the afflicted. The hope was that controlled dancing would somehow cure the problem. Instead, the opposite happened. The music only made the situation worse. More people began dancing. The strange epidemic spread even further. By August, the streets of Strasbourg were filled with exhausted citizens moving uncontrollably. Finally, the authorities realized their mistake. They stopped the music and closed the dance stages. Instead, they tried a different approach. The afflicted dancers were taken to a shrine dedicated to St. Vitus in the nearby mountains. There, religious rituals were performed in hopes of breaking the curse. Some people reportedly recovered after these pilgrimages. But historians still debate whether the rituals actually helped or whether the outbreak simply faded on its own. Eventually, the dancing stopped. By early September, the strange epidemic had ended. The streets returned to normal. But the question remained: what had caused the dancing plague? For centuries, historians and scientists have tried to understand the strange event. Several explanations have been proposed. One theory suggests that the dancers were suffering from ergot poisoning. Ergot is a fungus that can grow on rye, a common grain used to make bread during the medieval period. When people consume bread contaminated with ergot, they may experience hallucinations, convulsions, and strange muscle movements. Some researchers believe that contaminated grain might have caused the strange dancing behavior. But there are problems with this theory. Ergot poisoning usually causes violent muscle spasms and severe illness. It does not typically cause coordinated dancing that lasts for days or weeks. Another theory focuses on mass hysteria, also known as mass psychogenic illness. This phenomenon occurs when stress and fear spread through a group of people, causing physical symptoms without a clear medical cause. In the early 1500s, life in Strasbourg was extremely stressful. Famine, disease, and poverty had created a population living under constant anxiety. Some historians believe that the dancing plague may have been a psychological reaction to these pressures. In such situations, one person's unusual behavior can trigger a chain reaction. Others begin to experience similar symptoms. Sometimes unconsciously, the mind and body become trapped in a cycle of fear and imitation. This explanation may sound unusual, but similar outbreaks of mass hysteria have occurred throughout history. In some cases, entire schools or communities have experienced strange symptoms without any identifiable physical cause. Still, even the mass hysteria theory does not fully explain the intensity of the dancing plague. The endurance displayed by some of the dancers seems almost impossible. Dancing continuously for hours or days without rest would push the human body to its limits. Some historians believe the truth may involve multiple factors: stress, malnutrition, extreme heat, religious fear, all combining to create a strange psychological and physical reaction within the population. But because the event happened more than 500 years ago, many details have been lost. The records that remain are incomplete, and the people who experienced the dancing plague could never explain what had taken control of their bodies. Today, the story remains one of the most mysterious events in medical history. Hundreds of people dancing in the streets, some collapsing from exhaustion, some unable to stop even when their bodies begged them to rest. For weeks, an entire city was caught in a bizarre and terrifying epidemic of movement. And even now, centuries later, the dancing plague of 1518 continues to puzzle historians and scientists alike. What force drove those people to dance? Was it illness, psychological stress, or something we still do not fully understand? The streets of Strasbourg are quiet today. Tourists walk along the same cobblestones where the strange outbreak once occurred. But somewhere beneath the calm surface of history lies the memory of a summer when hundreds of people danced without control, and no one could explain why. The Tunguska explosion. When the sky struck Siberia. On the morning of June 30th, 1908, in one of the most remote regions of the world, something exploded in the sky with a force so powerful that it flattened an entire forest. The blast was unlike anything most people had ever witnessed. It was not a volcanic eruption, it was not a bomb, and it was not an earthquake. But the explosion was strong enough to knock people off their feet hundreds of miles away. Windows shattered in distant towns, the ground trembled, and above the wilderness of Siberia, witnesses described seeing a blinding fireball tearing across the sky. Even today, more than a century later, the exact cause of the Tunguska explosion remains one of the greatest mysteries in modern science. To understand what happened that day, we must travel to a vast region of Russia known as Siberia. Siberia is one of the largest wilderness areas on Earth. Stretching across millions of square miles, it is filled with endless forests, frozen rivers, and remote landscapes where few people live. In the early 20th century, much of Siberia was almost completely unexplored. Small villages were scattered across the region, but enormous areas of land remained untouched by civilization. One such place was near the Podkamennaya Tunguska River, deep in the heart of central Siberia. It was here, on that summer morning in 1908, that something extraordinary occurred. Several witnesses living in nearby villages later reported seeing a strange object moving through the sky. They described it as a bright glowing fireball, blazing across the horizon. Some said it looked like a second sun. Others claimed it left a trail of smoke behind it. The object moved rapidly across the sky before suddenly exploding. What followed was an enormous blast. A shockwave tore across the forest, flattening trees for miles in every direction. People living dozens of miles away reported feeling the heat of the explosion on their skin. Some were thrown to the ground by the force of the blast. One witness described the moment this way: the sky split open, and fire appeared high above the forest. The heat was intense, and the ground shook like thunder. The explosion occurred high above the ground, but its power was devastating. Later estimates suggest that the blast released energy equivalent to 10 to 15 million tons of TNT. To put that into perspective, the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima during World War II released about 15,000 tons of TNT. The Tunguska explosion was hundreds of times more powerful. And yet, incredibly, there was no impact crater. When investigators eventually reached the site years later, they found something astonishing. More than 80 million trees had been knocked down. The forest had been flattened across an area of roughly 2,000 square kilometers. But instead of forming a crater like a typical meteor impact, the trees lay in a strange pattern. They were arranged in a radial formation, all pointing away from a central point. It looked as if a massive blast had erupted in the air above the forest. The trees directly beneath the explosion remained standing, but their branches had been burned away. The rest of the surrounding forest had been knocked flat, like matchsticks. It was clear that something enormous had exploded above the ground. But what? At first, scientists struggled to investigate the event. The explosion had occurred in such a remote area that it took nearly 2 decades before a scientific expedition reached the site. In 1927, Russian scientist Leonid Kulik led the first major investigation. When Kulik arrived, he was stunned by what he saw. The destruction stretched across miles of wilderness. Entire hillsides were covered with fallen trees. But once again, there was no crater, no large pieces of rock, no obvious sign of what had caused the explosion. Kulik believed the event had been caused by a meteorite. According to this theory, a large space rock had entered Earth's atmosphere and exploded before reaching the ground. This type of event is known as an airburst. When a meteoroid enters the atmosphere at extremely high speed, the pressure and heat can cause it to explode in midair. The resulting shockwave can cause massive damage on the ground. Many scientists believe this is the most likely explanation for the Tunguska explosion. A meteor roughly 50 to 60 meters wide may have entered the atmosphere at high speed. Before it could reach the surface, the intense heat and pressure caused it to explode about 5 to 10 kilometers above the Earth. This would explain the enormous blast and the lack of a crater. The object would have vaporized almost completely in the explosion. But even this explanation leaves unanswered questions. For one thing, scientists have found very few meteorite fragments at the site. Usually, meteor impacts leave behind pieces of rock or metal. But in Tunguska, such evidence has been extremely rare. Another mystery involves the strange atmospheric effects reported after the explosion. For several nights following the event, people across Europe and Asia reported seeing unusually bright skies. Even at midnight, the sky glowed with an eerie silver light. Some people claimed they could read newspapers outdoors at night without any artificial lighting. Scientists believe this may have been caused by dust and particles from the explosion spreading through the upper atmosphere. But once again, the details remain uncertain. Over the years, many alternative theories have been proposed. Some researchers suggested the explosion might have been caused by a comet rather than a meteor. Comets are made largely of ice and dust. If a comet fragment entered the atmosphere, it might explode without leaving many solid fragments behind. Others propose more unusual ideas. Some early researchers speculated about natural gas explosions beneath the Earth's surface. Perhaps gas trapped underground had somehow ignited, but there was little evidence to support this. More imaginative theories soon followed. Some people suggested the explosion might have been caused by a small black hole passing through Earth. Others proposed that it was the result of an experimental weapon developed by Nikola Tesla, the famous inventor. Still others believed the event might have been caused by the destruction of an alien spacecraft. These ideas captured public imagination, but they lacked scientific support. Most scientists continue to favor the meteor airburst explanation. However, because the explosion occurred more than a century ago, and because the region remains difficult to study, some details may never be fully confirmed. Even today, researchers continue to study the Tunguska event. New technologies allow scientists to analyze soil samples, tree rings, and satellite images in ways that were impossible in the past. Each new study brings us closer to understanding what happened, but the mystery is not completely solved. What we do know is that on a quiet morning in 1908, something from space entered Earth's atmosphere and exploded with incredible force. It flattened forests, shook the ground, and left behind one of the most fascinating scientific mysteries in modern history. If the object had exploded over a populated city instead of an empty forest, the destruction could have been catastrophic. Entire cities might have been destroyed. Millions of lives could have been lost. Instead, the explosion occurred in one of the most remote places on Earth, and the Siberian wilderness absorbed the impact. The fallen trees have long since begun to grow back. The forest slowly healed itself. But the mystery of what exactly exploded above Tunguska still lingers in the history books. A reminder that even today, our planet remains vulnerable to forces arriving from the depths of space. And sometimes, those forces arrive without warning, blazing through the sky, exploding above the Earth, and vanishing without leaving a clear explanation behind. The Taos Hum, the sound that no one could find in a quiet town nestled among the mountains of northern New Mexico. A strange mystery has troubled residents for decades. It is not something people can see. It leaves no physical trace. There are no explosions, no strange lights, no obvious signs that anything unusual is happening. And yet, for some people, the mystery is impossible to ignore. Because they can hear it. A low, persistent sound, a distant droning noise that never seems to stop. Some describe it as the hum of a diesel engine idling far away. Others say it sounds like a faint vibration, like heavy machinery operating somewhere beneath the ground. For those who hear it, the sound can be maddening. It often becomes louder at night when the world grows quiet. It can make sleep difficult. It can cause headaches and anxiety. And perhaps the most frustrating part is this: most people cannot hear it at all. This strange phenomenon has become known as the Taos Hum, and for more than 30 years, scientists, investigators, and residents have searched for its source, but the sound remains a mystery. The town of Taos, located in northern New Mexico, is known for its stunning desert landscapes and rich cultural history. Surrounded by the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, the area has long attracted artists, travelers, and those seeking a quieter life away from large cities. With a population of only a few thousand people, Taos is a place where life moves at a slower pace. Visitors often describe the town as peaceful, but sometime in the early 1990s, a number of residents began reporting something strange. They claimed they could hear a constant low-frequency sound. The noise was faint but persistent. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Some residents said the hum sounded like a large truck engine running far in the distance. Others compared it to the sound of a refrigerator motor or a faint electrical buzz. But no matter how they described it, one thing remained consistent. The sound never seemed to stop. At first, the reports were sporadic. Only a few individuals mentioned hearing the strange noise. But as time went on, more people began speaking about it. Soon, the local newspaper started receiving letters from residents asking the same question: what was causing the hum? The strange thing was that only a small portion of the population could hear it. Estimates suggest that only about 2 to 4% of people in the area reported hearing the sound. For everyone else, the town remained perfectly silent. This made the mystery even more confusing. If the sound was real, why could only a few people hear it? And if it was imaginary, why were so many people describing the same experience? Eventually, the reports attracted national attention. In 1993, the U.S. Congress even requested an official investigation into the phenomenon. A team of scientists and engineers arrived in Taos to study the mystery. They brought sensitive audio equipment designed to detect low-frequency sounds. They measured vibrations in the ground. They examined electrical systems and industrial equipment in the area. Their goal was simple: find the source of the hum. But despite weeks of careful testing, the investigators found almost nothing. The instruments recorded no unusual sounds, no hidden machinery, no underground vibrations strong enough to explain what residents were hearing. And yet many people in the town insisted the hum was real. Some described feeling the sound rather than hearing it. They reported a strange vibration in their chest or ears. Others said the noise seemed to pulse slowly, rising and falling in intensity. One resident described the experience this way: "It's like living next to a truck that never turns off." For people sensitive to the sound, the effect could be exhausting. Several residents reported insomnia. Others complained of headaches or stress caused by the constant noise. Some even chose to move away from the area entirely, hoping to escape the hum. But what could cause such a strange phenomenon? Over the years, several theories have been proposed. One possibility involves low-frequency sound waves, also known as infrasound. Infrasound refers to sound waves that vibrate at frequencies below the range of normal human hearing. While most people cannot consciously hear these sounds, some individuals may be sensitive enough to detect them. Natural sources of infrasound can include ocean waves, earthquakes, volcanic activity, and powerful winds. In some cases, industrial equipment can also produce low-frequency vibrations. If such sounds were present around Taos, it might explain why only certain individuals could hear them. But investigators struggled to find any consistent source. There were no large factories nearby, no major highways producing constant traffic noise, and no geological activity that could clearly explain the reports. Another theory suggested that the hum might come from distant industrial activity. Some researchers speculated that mining operations or heavy machinery located many miles away could produce vibrations that traveled through the ground or air. But once again, testing failed to identify any specific location responsible for the sound. Some scientists began exploring the possibility that the hum might not be an external sound at all. Instead, they suggested it could be related to human hearing itself. In certain cases, people can experience a condition known as spontaneous otoacoustic emissions. This occurs when the inner ear produces faint sounds on its own. Normally, these sounds are too quiet to notice, but under certain conditions, individuals may become aware of them. Another possibility involves a medical condition known as tinnitus. Tinnitus causes people to hear ringing, buzzing, or humming sounds without any external source. While tinnitus usually produces higher-pitched noises, some experts believe unusual variations could create a low-frequency hum. However, many residents strongly reject this explanation. They argue that the sound feels external, not something originating inside their ears. Some even claim they can hear the hum more clearly outdoors than indoors. Others say the sound becomes louder at specific locations around the town. Because of this, many people remain convinced that the hum must have a physical source. Over the years, more unusual theories have emerged. Some residents suspect the hum might be linked to military activity. Northern New Mexico is home to several government research facilities, including the famous Los Alamos National Laboratory. Could secret experiments or underground equipment be producing vibrations that travel through the landscape? Officials at the laboratory have repeatedly denied any connection to the hum. Other theories venture even further into speculation. Some people believe the hum might be caused by electromagnetic signals from communication towers or satellites. Others suggest it could be related to underground geological processes we do not yet fully understand. And of course, there are always those who propose more mysterious explanations. Could the hum be a signal of some unknown natural phenomenon, or something we have yet to discover? The truth is that the Taoist hum is not unique. Similar reports have appeared in other parts of the world. Cities in England, Canada, and Australia have all experienced mysterious low-frequency sounds that only some people can hear. These events are often referred to as world hums. Despite years of research, none of them have been completely explained. Today, the mystery continues. Some residents of Taos still claim they hear the strange hum late at night. Others say the sound has faded over the years, and many people in the town have never heard anything unusual at all. The investigation remains open. Scientists continue to study low-frequency sound and its effects on human hearing. New technology may one day provide answers that were impossible to obtain in the past. But for now, the hum remains exactly what it has always been, a faint, mysterious sound heard only by a few. A noise that seems to drift through the quiet desert air without revealing its origin. And somewhere in the stillness of the New Mexico night, when the world grows silent and the wind settles over the mountains, some residents say the sound returns. A quiet vibration, a distant droning hum, always present, never explained, and impossible for those who hear it to ignore. The Sodder children disappearance. A fire that left no answers on Christmas Eve in 1945. A quiet home in the small town of Fayetteville, West Virginia, became the center of one of the most puzzling mysteries in American history. It began with a fire. Fires, sadly, were not uncommon in the mid-20th century. Homes built largely of wood, heated by coal stoves or furnaces, could ignite quickly if something went wrong. Most tragedies of that kind followed a tragic but understandable pattern. But the fire that destroyed the Sodder family home left behind something far stranger. 5 children vanished. Not a single bone was ever found. And for decades afterward, their parents remained convinced that their children had not died in the flames at all. The Sodder family had immigrated to the United States from Italy years earlier. The father, George Sodder, had built a successful trucking business and had become well known in the local community. He was outspoken, hardworking, and determined to give his family a stable life. George and his wife Jenny had 10 children. Their house stood on a hillside overlooking Fayetteville, a sturdy 2-story home where the family lived comfortably. On the night of December 24th, the household was filled with the usual excitement that comes with Christmas. Children had opened presents. Laughter echoed through the rooms. As the evening grew late, most of the younger children went upstairs to bed. 5 of them remained there that night: Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty. The older children stayed awake a little longer, enjoying the holiday before heading to sleep themselves. Nothing seemed unusual. But shortly after midnight, something strange happened. Jenny Sodder was awakened by the sound of a telephone ringing downstairs. She answered the call and heard the voice of a woman she did not recognize, asking for someone who did not live in the house. There was laughter in the background, and the caller seemed confused. Jenny assumed it was simply a wrong number. She hung up and returned to bed. But as she walked through the house, she noticed something odd. The lights in the living room were still on, and the curtains were open. One of the doors had been left unlocked. She closed everything up and went back upstairs. Sometime later, another sound woke her. This time it was a loud crash on the roof, followed by a rolling noise. She listened for a moment, but heard nothing else. Thinking perhaps a branch had fallen onto the house, she went back to sleep. But at around 1002, Jenny suddenly woke again. The house was filled with smoke. Flames were spreading rapidly through the lower floor. She immediately woke George, and the two of them began shouting for the children. The fire was already growing out of control. Two of the older sons managed to escape through windows. Another daughter ran outside with them. George and Jenny were able to rescue some of their children who had been sleeping downstairs, but the 5 younger children upstairs never appeared. George attempted to reach them. The staircase was already engulfed in flames. He ran outside, hoping to climb up to the second floor using a ladder that was normally kept beside the house. But when he reached the yard, the ladder was gone. He then tried to use one of his trucks to climb onto the roof. But both trucks refused to start, despite having worked perfectly the day before. With the fire spreading rapidly, the parents could only watch helplessly as the house burned. Within minutes, the entire structure collapsed into flames. The local fire department arrived, but it was far too late to save the building. By morning, nothing remained but smoldering ruins. Investigators sifted through the debris looking for remains of the 5 missing children. But they found nothing, no bones, no bodies, no trace that the children had died in the fire at all. At first, officials believed the intense heat may have completely destroyed the remains, but this explanation quickly raised questions. Experts later pointed out that even extremely intense fires usually leave behind at least fragments of bone. In many cases, skeletons remain partially intact. But in the Sodder house, there was absolutely nothing. This disturbing discovery left George and Jenny deeply suspicious. They began wondering if their children had even been inside the house when the fire started. Soon, more strange details began to surface. The ladder that George had intended to use had mysteriously disappeared before the fire. The telephone line to the house had been cut. Later investigators discovered that the wire had not burned in the fire. It had been physically severed beforehand. Then there were the trucks. Both vehicles had stopped working that night, even though they had functioned normally earlier in the day. All of these details suggested the possibility that something far more deliberate had happened. George Sodder soon began to suspect that the fire had not been an accident. In the months before the tragedy, he had received several strange warnings from individuals who disagreed with his outspoken political views. George had been openly critical of the Italian dictator Benito Mussolini during World War II, and some members of the local Italian community reportedly took offense. One man had even threatened that George's house would go up in smoke. Another unusual detail came from witnesses. Several neighbors later reported seeing strange vehicles parked near the Sodder home in the days before the fire. Others claimed they had seen unfamiliar men watching the house. One woman said she had seen a group of children matching the missing children's descriptions at a roadside restaurant shortly after the fire. Over the years, the Sodder family received several mysterious leads. In 1949, George hired a private investigator to re-examine the fire site. During the excavation, investigators discovered something surprising. Human vertebrae fragments were found in the ashes. But later analysis suggested that the bones did not belong to the missing children. Some researchers believe the bones may have been planted in the debris to convince the family that their children had died. Another strange clue arrived years later. In 1967, Jenny Sodder received a photograph in the mail. The picture showed a young man who resembled her missing son Louis. On the back of the photograph was a cryptic message. It read, "Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie. Illo boys. A9132 or 35. The meaning of the message was never fully understood, but George and Jenny became convinced that at least one of their children had survived. For decades, they continued searching. They placed billboards along highways offering rewards for information. They followed up on countless leads. Some tips suggested the children had been kidnapped. Others claimed they had been raised under different names in other states. None of these leads ever produced clear answers. Years turned into decades. George Sodder died in 1969 without ever learning what had happened to his children. Jenny continued to believe they were alive until her own death many years later. Today, the Sodder children mystery remains unsolved. Some investigators believe the official explanation may still be correct. Perhaps the fire truly was intense enough to destroy the remains. Others believe the strange circumstances surrounding the fire suggest something more sinister. Could the children have been kidnapped before the fire began? Was the blaze deliberately set as a cover for an abduction, or were the clues simply coincidences that created the appearance of something mysterious? More than 70 years later, the truth remains hidden. The ruins of the Sodder house have long since disappeared. The hillside where the home once stood is quiet now, but the mystery of what happened to those 5 children on Christmas Eve continues to haunt investigators and historians alike. A fire that destroyed a home, a tragedy that changed a family forever, and a question that still echoes through history. What really happened to the Sodder children? The Green Children of Woolpit. Visitors from an unknown world in the quiet countryside of medieval England, sometime during the 12th century, a strange and unsettling story began to spread among the villagers of a small farming community. The village was called Woolpit, located in the county of Suffolk. At the time, it was a modest rural settlement surrounded by farmland, forests, and narrow dirt roads that connected it to other villages. Life there was simple. Farmers worked the fields. Children helped tend livestock. Days passed slowly, marked by the rhythms of planting, harvest, and church bells. But one day, something appeared in Woolpit that no one could explain. 2 children. At first, their arrival might have seemed ordinary. Children wandering into villages was not unusual in medieval England. Travelers often passed through small communities, and orphaned or lost children sometimes appeared seeking help. But these 2 children were different. Very different. Their skin was green. The story first appeared in historical records written by 2 medieval chroniclers, William of Newburgh and Ralph of Coggeshall. According to their accounts, the strange children were discovered near one of the village's many wolf pits, deep holes dug into the ground to trap wolves that threatened livestock. These pits were covered with branches and leaves, making them difficult to see. In fact, the village of Woolpit itself got its name from these traps. When the villagers found the 2 children near one of the pits, they immediately noticed something strange. Their skin had a pale green color, not the normal tone of a healthy child, but a faint, unnatural shade of green. Their clothing was also unfamiliar. It was made from a strange fabric that no one in the village recognized. And when the villagers tried to speak to them, the children answered in a language that no one could understand. The boy and the girl appeared frightened and confused. They refused to eat the food offered to them. Bread, vegetables, meat. Nothing seemed to interest them. Days passed and the villagers struggled to understand where the children had come from. Eventually, the children were taken into the household of a local nobleman named Sir Richard de Callan. There, they were cared for and observed more closely, but even then, their strange behavior continued. The children refused most foods, they seemed frightened of ordinary objects, and they still spoke only in their strange, unknown language. Then one day, something unexpected happened. While exploring the household garden, the children discovered a pile of freshly harvested beans. Suddenly, they became excited. They rushed toward the beans and began eating them eagerly. For some reason, this was the only food they would accept. For a long time, beans were the only thing the children would eat. Gradually, over the weeks that followed, their diet expanded. They began trying other foods. And as their health improved, the strange green color of their skin slowly faded. But the mystery of their origin remained. Where had they come from? Why had their skin been green? And why did they speak a language that no one recognized? Sadly, the young boy did not survive for long. According to the historical accounts, he became ill and died not long after arriving in Woolpit. But the girl lived. Over time, she began learning the local language. Eventually, she was able to communicate with the people around her. And when she was asked where she and her brother had come from, her answer only deepened the mystery. According to the girl, they came from a place called St. Martin's Land. She described it as a strange world where everything existed in a kind of perpetual twilight. The sun never shone brightly there. Instead, the land was dimly lit, as though the sun was always setting. The people of this land all had green skin like the children once had. The girl claimed that she and her brother had been tending their father's cattle when they heard a loud noise. Following the sound, they came upon what appeared to be a cave. Inside the cave, they wandered for some time before emerging into the bright sunlight of Woolpit. They had no idea where they were or how they had arrived there. The villagers were baffled by this story. Some believed the children had simply come from a distant land. Perhaps they had been lost or separated from their family. Others believed the children might have belonged to a community of Flemish immigrants who had settled in parts of England during that period. The unfamiliar language and clothing might have been explained if the children came from such a group, but that still did not explain the green skin. Over time, several theories have been proposed. One possibility is that the children suffered from a medical condition known as chlorosis, sometimes called green sickness. This condition was caused by severe iron deficiency and could give the skin a pale green tint. If the children had been malnourished before arriving in Woolpit, their strange appearance might have been explained. The fact that their skin returned to normal after they began eating properly could support this theory. Another explanation involves the possibility that the children had been living underground or in darkness for a long time. Perhaps they had been hiding or living in caves. A lack of sunlight combined with poor nutrition could have caused unusual changes in their skin tone. But even with these theories, several details remain difficult to explain. Their language was never identified, their clothing was unfamiliar, and their description of St. Martin's Land suggested a place very different from the surrounding regions. Because of this, the story has also inspired more imaginative ideas. Some researchers have suggested that the children might have come from another dimension or hidden world. Their description of a land that existed in constant twilight has led some people to speculate about underground civilizations or parallel realms. Others have even suggested the possibility of extraterrestrial origins. Though such ideas are fascinating, there is no evidence to support them. Most historians believe the story has likely been exaggerated over time. Medieval writers often recorded unusual events in ways that mixed fact with folklore. It is possible that the original event involved two lost children from a distant region whose appearance seemed unusual to local villagers. Over the centuries, the details may have become more mysterious as the story was retold. Still, the account of the green children remains one of the most unusual stories from medieval history. The girl who survived eventually grew up and lived a relatively normal life. Some sources claim she later married and moved to another town, but the mystery of her origin was never fully solved. Who were these children? Where did they really come from? Were they simply lost travelers suffering from illness and malnutrition? Or did their strange story hint at something far more unusual? The village of Woolpit still exists today. Visitors walk through its quiet streets, surrounded by the same rolling countryside that once puzzled medieval villagers. But the story of the green children has never been forgotten. It remains one of history's most curious mysteries. A tale of two strange visitors who appeared out of nowhere. Children with green skin, speaking an unknown language, claiming to come from a land where the sun never fully shone. And then, just as mysteriously as they arrived, the truth about their origins faded into the shadows of history. The Oak Island Money Pit. A treasure that refuses to be found on a small island off the coast of Nova Scotia, Canada. A mystery has been unfolding for more than 2 centuries. It is a mystery of buried treasure, hidden tunnels, strange traps beneath the earth, and countless attempts to uncover whatever lies deep below the ground. The place is called Oak Island, and at its center is a location known as the Money Pit. To this day, no one knows exactly what lies buried there. But over the years, people have spent fortunes digging for answers. Some have even lost their lives trying. And yet the island continues to guard its secret. The story begins in the year 1795. At the time, Oak Island was a quiet, wooded island located in Mahone Bay along the Atlantic coast. The island was covered with oak trees and surrounded by calm waters. Few people lived there. But one day, a young boy named Daniel McGinnis noticed something unusual. While exploring the island, he came across a strange depression in the ground beneath a large oak tree. The ground appeared to have sunk slightly, as if something beneath the surface had collapsed. What made the spot even more curious was a block-and-tackle pulley system hanging from the tree above. To Daniel, it looked like someone had once used the tree to lower objects into the ground. Intrigued, he began digging. Soon he invited 2 friends, John Smith and Anthony Vaughan, to help him. At first, the digging was easy, but as they went deeper, they began uncovering strange layers beneath the soil. About 10 feet down, they found a platform made of wooden logs. The logs were arranged neatly across the pit, forming what looked like a carefully constructed barrier. The boys removed the logs and continued digging. 10 feet deeper, they found another wooden platform, then another, and another. Each layer appeared to have been deliberately placed there. Whoever built the structure had clearly gone to great lengths to create something hidden beneath the earth. Excited by their discovery, the boys continued digging until they reached about 30 feet deep, but by then, the pit had become unstable and difficult to work in. Eventually, they stopped, promising to return later with better equipment. Over the next several years, word of the discovery spread. Treasure hunters began arriving on Oak Island. Many believed the pit might contain pirate treasure, perhaps hidden long ago by Captain Kidd or other famous pirates. Others suspected it might hold valuables buried during times of war. So new digging operations began. In 1804, a company called the Onslow Company organized a major excavation. With better tools and more workers, they began digging deeper into the pit. At around 90 feet, they discovered something remarkable. A stone slab with strange symbols carved into its surface. For years, the meaning of the symbols remained unknown. Later interpretations suggested the inscription might read, 40 feet below, 2 million pounds are buried. If this translation were accurate, it meant a vast treasure might be hidden somewhere beneath the pit. The excitement surrounding the discovery grew, but soon the diggers encountered a new problem. Water began flooding into the pit. No matter how much water they pumped out, more continued to flow in. Eventually, the workers realized something extraordinary. The pit appeared to be connected to underground flood tunnels. These tunnels led to the nearby ocean. Whenever the diggers tried to reach deeper levels, seawater rushed in and filled the excavation. It was almost as if the pit had been designed to protect whatever was hidden below. Over the years, numerous expeditions attempted to overcome this challenge. Each one believed they were close to discovering the island's secret, but each one eventually failed. Sometimes the tunnels collapsed, sometimes flooding made further digging impossible, and sometimes accidents ended the search altogether. The deeper investigators dug, the more complicated the structure beneath the island seemed to be. Some researchers discovered coconut fibers buried beneath the beach, a strange finding in Nova Scotia, where coconut trees do not grow. Others found evidence of carefully constructed drainage systems that seemed far too advanced for their time. These discoveries suggested that whoever built the money pit had used complex engineering techniques. But the question remained, who had built it and why? Over the years, many theories have been proposed. Some believe the treasure was hidden by pirates. Captain Kidd is often mentioned in these stories. According to legend, Kidd buried a vast fortune before being captured and executed in 1701. Oak Island would have been a perfect hiding place, remote, uninhabited, and easy to defend. Others believe the treasure might be connected to the Knights Templar, a medieval religious order known for its wealth and secrecy. Some theorists claim the Templars may have hidden sacred artifacts beneath Oak Island after their order was dissolved in the 14th century. These artifacts might include ancient manuscripts or religious relics. Another theory suggests the island may hold lost manuscripts of William Shakespeare. According to this idea, the famous plays may have been written by another individual whose identity had to remain secret. Supporters of this theory believe the original documents may have been hidden on Oak Island to protect them from political enemies. There are even theories involving the lost treasures of ancient civilizations, such as artifacts from Atlantis or hidden knowledge from early explorers of the New World. But despite all these fascinating possibilities, there is still no definitive proof that any treasure exists at all. What we do know is that Oak Island has claimed several lives. Over the years, at least 6 people have died during excavations on the island. Some were killed in tunnel collapses. Others died in accidents involving heavy machinery. There is even a legend among treasure hunters that 7 people must die before the treasure can be found. Whether or not the legend has any truth, it has only added to the island's reputation as a cursed place. In modern times, the search for the treasure has continued. Advanced technology, including sonar scanning and deep drilling equipment, has been used to explore the island. Investigators have discovered strange underground structures and cavities that suggest something unusual may indeed lie below. But so far, the ultimate secret remains hidden. Despite centuries of digging, flooding, and exploration, no one has ever uncovered the legendary treasure. Perhaps the money pit was an elaborate trap built to protect something valuable. Or perhaps the entire mystery began with nothing more than a natural sinkhole that captured the imagination of treasure hunters. Whatever the truth may be, Oak Island continues to fascinate explorers and historians alike. Its forests remain quiet, its shoreline calm, but beneath the earth, somewhere deep below the tangled roots of oak trees, the mystery of the money pit still waits. A puzzle that has challenged generations, a secret that refuses to reveal itself, and a reminder that sometimes the greatest treasures in history remain just beyond our reach. The Lead Masks of Brazil. 2 men, 1 hill, and a mystery that never spoke. In the summer of 1966, in the hills outside Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, 2 men were found lying side by side on a grassy slope. They were dressed neatly, as if prepared for a formal meeting. There were no signs of violence, no obvious struggle, no weapons, no footprints of attackers nearby, but there was something strange about their faces. Each man wore a thick, handmade mask made of lead. The masks covered their eyes like crude goggles, as if meant to protect them from something bright or something dangerous. Nearby, investigators discovered a small notebook. Inside were strange instructions written in Portuguese. 1630 at the specified location. 1830 ingest capsules. After effect, protect metals, wait for mask signal. No one knew what it meant. The 2 men were Miguel José Biana and Manuel Pereira de Cruz, both electronics technicians from the Brazilian city of Campos dos Goitacazes. They were known locally as intelligent and capable workers who repaired radios and televisions. Friends described them as serious, practical men. They had no history of violence or criminal behavior, yet somehow they had ended up dead on a remote hill, wearing lead masks and carrying a mysterious note. The place where they were found was called Morro do Vintém, or Vintém Hill. It rose above the coastal city of Niterói, across the bay from Rio de Janeiro. The hill was not especially famous at the time, but locals knew it as a quiet, isolated place surrounded by trees and grass. On August 20th, 1966, a teenage boy flying a kite noticed something unusual while looking down the hillside. 2 bodies lay motionless in the grass. Police soon arrived and confirmed the strange discovery. The men were lying on their backs, their coats carefully placed over their bodies as if someone had tried to make them comfortable. Each wore a suit jacket and formal clothing despite the warm weather, and both had the same unusual lead mask positioned over their eyes. The masks themselves were crudely cut pieces of metal, shaped roughly like sunglasses but without any lenses. They looked handmade, almost experimental. Nearby investigators found several odd items: a notebook containing the mysterious instructions, empty water bottles, a towel, 2 packages containing lead masks identical to the ones the men were wearing, but there were no capsules, and no sign of who or what the men had been waiting for. The autopsy revealed another strange detail. There were no signs of trauma, no wounds, no injuries, nothing to explain the cause of death. But because the bodies had been exposed to heat and humidity for several days before being discovered, the condition of the remains made it impossible for doctors to determine exactly how the men had died. No poison was detected. No clear cause could be identified. The men had simply died, and so the mystery began. To understand what might have happened on that hill, investigators retraced the men's final days. On August 17th, 3 days before the bodies were discovered, Biana and de Cruz had left their hometown and boarded a bus to Niterói, a coastal city about 300 kilometers away. Before leaving, the men told their families they were traveling to buy electronic equipment. This explanation made sense. As electronics technicians, they frequently purchased parts for their work. But several things about the trip seemed unusual. First, the men withdrew a significant amount of cash before leaving. Second, they packed light but brought formal clothing. And third, they seemed strangely secretive about their plans. When the bus arrived in Niterói, the 2 men were seen buying raincoats, even though the weather was warm and sunny. Later, they were spotted at a small bar near the base of Vintém Hill. The waitress remembered them clearly because they appeared nervous and repeatedly checked their watches. They bought a bottle of water. Then they left. That was the last confirmed sighting of them alive. Soon afterward, they apparently climbed the hill, and somewhere near the top something happened that led to their deaths. But what? One of the most puzzling clues remained the strange note, 1630B at the specified location. This suggested the men had planned to meet someone or witness something at a precise time. 1830 ingest capsules, but no capsules were found. Had they taken them already? If so, what were they? Drugs? Medicine? Poison? The next line was even more mysterious. Protect metals. Some investigators wondered whether the men believed they might be exposed to radiation or some type of energy field. That could explain the lead masks. Lead is commonly used as shielding against radiation. The final instruction read, "Wait for mask signal." No one has ever figured out what that meant. As investigators dug deeper into the men's background, a surprising detail emerged. Both Viana and De Cruz were involved in a small group interested in spiritualism and scientific experimentation. In Brazil during the 1960s, spiritualist beliefs were widespread, blending elements of religion, mysticism, and pseudoscience. Some groups believed it was possible to communicate with spirits or extraterrestrial beings through meditation, electronics, or other unusual experiments. Friends reported that the two men had previously attempted to build devices meant to contact other dimensions or receive signals from beyond Earth. Some investigators began to suspect that the trip to Vintame Hill had been part of such an experiment. Perhaps the men believed they would witness a supernatural event, or make contact with something unknown. The instructions in the notebook might have been part of a ritual or experimental procedure. Arrive at a specific location. Take capsules, possibly drugs meant to alter perception. Wear protective masks, and wait for some kind of signal. But if that was the case, why had they died? And where had the capsules gone? Some researchers believe the men may have ingested powerful hallucinogenic substances that caused them to collapse or suffer fatal reactions. Others suggest that the capsules might have contained poison. But if that were true, why would they intentionally take them? Another possibility is that the men were victims of a failed experiment. Perhaps they were testing electronic equipment designed to detect or produce unusual energy fields. Maybe they believed they were shielding themselves from radiation with the lead masks, but something went wrong, and they died. More speculative theories soon emerged. Some people suggested that the men had been attempting to contact extraterrestrials and were waiting for a UFO signal. Others believed they might have been victims of secret government experiments involving radiation or electronics. But no evidence supported these ideas. The investigation slowly lost momentum. Without a clear cause of death, the case became increasingly difficult to solve. Over time, the strange story of the lead masks case faded into legend. But many questions remain unanswered. Why had the men traveled so far from home? What were the capsules they planned to take? Why wear lead masks? And what exactly were they waiting for on that quiet hillside? Perhaps the most unsettling part of the mystery is the calm way the men appeared to face whatever happened. They were not running, they were not fighting, they were lying peacefully, side by side, as if waiting for something that never arrived. To this day, the lead masks themselves remain one of the strangest pieces of evidence in any unsolved case. Crude metal goggles meant to shield the eyes from something unseen. Whether they were protection from radiation, part of a ritual, or simply a misunderstanding of science, no one can say. The hill where the men died still overlooks the city of Niterói. People pass nearby every day without realizing the strange mystery that unfolded there, but the unanswered questions remain. Two men climbed a hill with a plan, a notebook full of instructions, and masks meant to protect them from something. Then, sometime after sunset, they lay down in the grass and never rose again. The Dyatlov Pass incident. The night the mountains turned deadly high in the remote Ural Mountains of Russia, where icy winds sweep endlessly across frozen ridges and forests, stretch for miles without a single sign of civilization, a group of experienced hikers set out on what should have been a difficult but manageable winter expedition. They were young, skilled, and well prepared, but weeks later, when rescuers finally discovered their camp, something was terribly wrong. The tent had been sliced open from the inside. Boots, coats, and supplies were left behind, and the hikers themselves were gone. What happened to them in the freezing darkness of that mountain pass would become one of the most chilling and mysterious cases in modern history. The story begins in January of 1959. 10 experienced hikers from the Ural Polytechnic Institute in the Soviet Union had planned a challenging skiing expedition deep into the northern Ural Mountains. Their goal was to reach a remote peak known as Otorten. The group was led by Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student known for his strong leadership and experience in difficult terrain. The expedition included 8 other students and one experienced instructor named Semyon Zolotaryov, a 38-year-old veteran of World War II. All of them were skilled in winter survival and mountaineering. They were used to harsh conditions. The route they planned was classified as Category 3, the most difficult level of hiking in the Soviet Union at the time. But the group had trained for it. They carried proper equipment. They had studied the terrain, and they expected to complete the journey within a few weeks. At first, everything went according to plan. On January 23rd, the hikers boarded a train that carried them north toward the Ural region. From there, they traveled by truck and skis toward the mountains. One member of the group, Yuri Yudin, began experiencing severe joint pain early in the trip. Recognizing that he would not be able to complete the expedition, Yudin made the difficult decision to turn back. He said goodbye to his friends and returned home. It was the last time anyone would see the others alive. As the remaining 9 hikers continued deeper into the mountains, they kept detailed journals and photographs documenting their journey. The entries showed that they were in good spirits. They joked with one another, sang songs, and laughed as they struggled through deep snow and freezing temperatures. On February 1st, 1959, the group reached a wind-swept mountain slope known as Kolitsiakl. The name came from the language of the local Mansi people. It meant Mountain of the Dead. The name alone was unsettling, but the hikers were not concerned. They set up their large canvas tent on the open slope, anchoring it firmly in the snow. It was a difficult place to camp. The wind was strong. The temperature that night dropped to around 25 degrees, Sostry, 6°9 forward. But the hikers were experienced. They had faced worse conditions before. Inside the tent they changed clothes, ate dinner, and prepared for sleep. Then, sometime during the night, something happened. Something so frightening that the hikers suddenly cut their way out of the tent from the inside. Rescuers would later find the tent abandoned. The fabric had been slashed open with a knife. Inside, all of the hikers' warm clothing, boots, and supplies were still neatly arranged. But the hikers themselves were gone. They had fled the tent into the freezing night wearing little or no protective clothing. When rescue teams arrived weeks later, they followed footprints leading down the snowy slope. The tracks showed that the hikers had walked away calmly rather than running. But they had left behind the very gear that could have saved their lives. The footprints led about 15 kilometers down the mountain toward a small forest. There, beneath a large cedar tree, rescuers discovered the first 2 bodies. They belonged to Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko. Both men were wearing almost no clothing. They had attempted to build a small fire near the tree, and broken branches up to 5 meters high suggested they had climbed the tree, possibly trying to see their abandoned camp above the slope. The 2 men had died from hypothermia. A short distance away, 3 more bodies were discovered in the snow. These were Igor Dyatlov, Zenaida Kolmogorova, and Rustam Slobodin. Their positions suggested they had been trying to return to the tent. They too had died from freezing temperatures. At this point, investigators believed the mystery might be solved. Perhaps the hikers had panicked during a storm or avalanche. Maybe they fled the tent and later became lost in the darkness. But when the remaining 4 hikers were discovered 2 months later, the mystery became far more disturbing. The last bodies were found in a ravine beneath several feet of snow, and their injuries were unlike anything investigators expected. Ludmila Dubinina had suffered massive chest trauma. Her ribs were crushed with a force comparable to a car accident. Even more strangely, her tongue was missing. Alexander Zolotaryov had severe chest injuries as well. Nikolai Thibault-Brignol had suffered a crushing skull fracture, and Semyon Zolotaryov was found wearing a camera around his neck. But the film inside revealed nothing helpful. There were no external wounds to explain these injuries, no signs of a violent struggle. Yet the internal damage was severe, almost as if a powerful force had struck them. Another strange discovery added to the mystery. Some pieces of clothing belonging to the victims showed elevated levels of radiation. Not extremely high levels, but enough to raise questions. Where had the radiation come from? And why were some of the hikers missing clothing while others were wearing extra layers taken from their companions? Investigators concluded that the group had likely tried to survive by sharing whatever clothing they could find after leaving the tent, but the deeper question remained unanswered. Why did they leave the tent in the first place? The official Soviet investigation eventually ruled that the hikers died because of an unknown compelling force. It was a vague explanation that satisfied almost no one. Over the decades that followed, countless theories have been proposed. Some researchers believe a small avalanche may have threatened a tent. The hikers might have panicked and escaped quickly before being buried. But critics point out that the slope where the tent was found did not show typical avalanche damage. Others suggest the group may have been exposed to infrasound, a low-frequency vibration caused by strong winds passing over the mountain. Infrasound can sometimes trigger feelings of fear and panic. Perhaps the hikers experienced an overwhelming sense of danger and fled their tent without fully understanding why. More unusual theories involve secret military testing. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union conducted weapons experiments in remote regions. Some researchers believe the hikers may have been accidentally caught in the path of a military device or explosive test. Others have suggested that parachute mines, powerful airburst explosives used during wartime, might explain the internal injuries. But no official records confirm such activity in the area. And then there are the more mysterious explanations. Some people believe the hikers may have encountered unknown creatures, perhaps related to local legends of the Yeti. Others suggest the presence of unidentified flying objects, citing reports of strange orange lights seen in the sky around the time of the incident. But again, there is no evidence supporting these ideas. In recent years, scientists have revisited the case using modern technology. Computer simulations and snow analysis suggest that a rare type of slab avalanche might have triggered the disaster. If a block of heavy snow collapsed onto the tent, the hikers may have cut their way out quickly to escape being buried. In the darkness and freezing wind, they may have been unable to return to their shelter. Some members of the group might have fallen into the ravine while trying to find safety, explaining the severe injuries. This explanation is currently considered one of the most likely, but it still does not answer every question. Why did they leave without boots? Why were some of the injuries so extreme? And why did several hikers appear to move calmly rather than in panic? More than 60 years later, the Dyatlov Pass incident remains one of the most haunting mysteries in mountaineering history. 9 skilled hikers, a tent cut open from the inside, footprints leading into the frozen darkness, and bodies scattered across a silent mountain slope. The pass where the tragedy occurred has since been renamed Dyatlov Pass in honor of the group's leader. Today, adventurous hikers sometimes visit the area, but many say the place still carries an eerie atmosphere. A lonely mountain, a freezing wind, and a mystery that has never been fully explained. Somewhere in the darkness of that February night, something happened on the slopes of Kolatsyakhl, and whatever it was, it drove 9 experienced hikers out of their shelter and into the deadly cold. A decision that none of them would survive. The Mary Celeste, the ship that sailed without a crew on a cold December morning in 1872, a British ship named Dei Gratia, was sailing through the Atlantic Ocean when its crew noticed something strange on the horizon. Another ship drifted slowly across the water. At first glance, nothing about the vessel seemed unusual. Its sails were raised. The ship appeared intact. But something about the way it moved through the sea caught the captain's attention. It was drifting aimlessly. No one appeared to be steering it. Curious and cautious, Captain David Morehouse ordered his crew to approach the mysterious ship. As they drew closer, they were able to read its name. It was called the Mary Celeste. Morehouse recognized the ship immediately. He had departed from the same port as the Mary Celeste several days earlier. The 2 ships had set sail from New York Harbor in November of 1872. The Mary Celeste had been heading toward Genoa, Italy, carrying a cargo of industrial alcohol. Everything about the ship's appearance suggested it should have been operating normally. But as the Dei Gratia crew pulled alongside and climbed aboard, they discovered something that would become one of the most famous maritime mysteries in history. The Mary Celeste was completely abandoned. There was no captain, no crew, no passengers. Not a single person remained aboard. Yet the ship itself appeared almost perfectly seaworthy. The sails were still rigged. The hull showed no serious damage. The cargo remained largely intact. Even the crew's personal belongings were still neatly stored in their cabins. It was as if everyone had suddenly vanished. The Mary Celeste had originally departed from New York on November 7, 1872. On board were Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife Sarah, their 2-year-old daughter Sophia, and a crew of 7 experienced sailors. Captain Briggs was known as a capable and respected seaman. His crew members were carefully chosen professionals. The voyage should have been routine. The ship carried 1,071 barrels of industrial alcohol, a valuable cargo, but not unusual for a transatlantic journey. Nothing about the voyage seemed particularly dangerous. The weather conditions had been mostly favorable. The crew had plenty of supplies, and Captain Briggs had a reputation for maintaining strict discipline and order. But when the De Gratia crew boarded the ship nearly a month later, the scene inside told a puzzling story. The ship's lifeboat was missing. The navigational instruments were gone, and the ship's logbook had not been updated for several days before the vessel was discovered. Yet aside from those details, everything else remained strangely untouched. The crew's clothing was still neatly folded in their cabins. The galley contained food supplies. There were no signs of violence or struggle anywhere on board. The cargo remained secured in the hold. Even more puzzling was the fact that the ship itself was still seaworthy. Although some water had accumulated in the lower part of the ship, it was nowhere near enough to cause it to sink. An experienced captain would not normally abandon a vessel under such conditions. So why had Captain Briggs and his crew left, and where had they gone? Captain Morehouse and his men sailed the Mary Celeste to Gibraltar, where authorities began investigating the strange case. At first, some officials suspected foul play. Could the crew of the De Gratia have attacked the Mary Celeste and killed its occupants? But there was no evidence to support this idea. No signs of bloodshed, no stone valuables, and no reason for Morehouse to risk such a crime. Another theory suggested the crew of the Mary Celeste may have staged a mutiny. Perhaps the sailors had turned against Captain Briggs, but again, the evidence did not support this idea. The ship was orderly. Nothing appeared damaged or disturbed, and there were no signs of violent conflict. Over time, investigators began considering the possibility that Captain Briggs had ordered the ship abandoned for some unknown reason. But what danger could have convinced him to leave a perfectly seaworthy vessel in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean? One of the most widely discussed theories involves the ship's cargo. The Mary Celeste carried hundreds of barrels of alcohol. Some investigators believe a leak from the cargo might have filled the ship's hold with flammable vapors. If the captain suspected an explosion might occur, he may have ordered the crew into the lifeboat temporarily while they waited for the danger to pass. In that scenario, the lifeboat might have been tethered to the ship with a rope. But if the rope snapped or the weather suddenly changed, the lifeboat could have drifted away, leaving the Mary Celeste sailing without its crew. Another possibility involves the ship's pump system. When investigators examined the vessel, they discovered that one of the pumps had been partially disassembled. If Captain Briggs believed the ship was taking on more water than it actually was, he may have feared that the vessel was sinking. In a moment of caution, he might have ordered everyone to abandon ship. But if that happened, the crew would have been left adrift in a small lifeboat far from land. Even calm seas can become deadly in the open ocean, and a small boat can easily disappear without leaving any trace. Other theories are far more dramatic. Some people have suggested that pirates might have boarded the ship and kidnapped the crew, but pirates would likely have stolen valuables or cargo and nothing appeared to be missing. Others have speculated about sea monsters, giant squids, or supernatural forces, but these ideas belong more to legend than reality. Over the years, the mystery of the Mary Celeste has inspired countless stories, books, and films. It has become one of the most famous ghost ship stories in maritime history. But despite all the attention the case has received, no definitive explanation has ever been proven. The final entry in the ship's logbook was dated November 25, 1872. It recorded the ship's position near the Azores Islands. When the De Gratia discovered the vessel on December 4th, it had drifted nearly 400 miles away from that location. This means the Mary Celeste had sailed across the ocean without a crew for more than a week. The ship itself eventually continued its career. After repairs and investigation, it returned to surface. but the story of its abandoned voyage never faded. Eventually, years later, the Mary Celeste itself was lost in a completely unrelated accident when it ran aground near Haiti, but its earlier mystery had already secured its place in history. Even today, more than 150 years later, the disappearance of Captain Briggs and his crew remains unsolved. No wreckage from the lifeboat was ever found, no bodies were ever recovered. The ocean simply swallowed them. What we do know is this. A fully functioning ship sailed across the Atlantic Ocean without anyone on board. Its crew had vanished without leaving behind any clear explanation, and the Mary Celeste continued drifting silently across the waves, carrying with it one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of the sea. The Wow. Signal. A message from the stars. On a warm summer night in 1977, deep in the quiet countryside of Ohio, a radio telescope was listening to the universe. It was not searching for planets. It was not studying galaxies. Instead, it was doing something far more intriguing. It was listening for signs of intelligent life beyond Earth. For decades, scientists had wondered whether humanity might someday detect a signal from another civilization somewhere among the stars. The universe is unimaginably vast. Our galaxy alone contains more than 100 billion stars, many of them surrounded by planets. If even a tiny fraction of those planets hosted intelligent life, then it was possible that somewhere, someone might be transmitting signals into space. To search for those signals, scientists launched a program known as SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. One of the instruments used for this work was the Big Ear radio telescope at Ohio State University. The Big Ear was not a typical telescope with mirrors or lenses. Instead, it was designed to detect radio waves coming from deep space. Radio waves travel enormous distances across the universe. If an advanced civilization were attempting to communicate with others across the galaxy, radio signals would be one of the most efficient methods. So night after night, the Big Ear quietly scanned the sky. Most of the time, the signals it detected were natural. They came from stars, galaxies, and cosmic phenomena that scientists already understood. But on August 15, 1977, something unusual appeared in the telescope's data. At first, no one noticed. The Big Ear telescope did not produce real-time displays. Instead, it printed its observations onto long sheets of paper filled with numbers and letters. Each column of characters represented the strength of radio signals coming from a particular part of the sky. A few days later, a scientist named Dr. Jerry Emin was reviewing the printouts. He had been examining the telescope's data for years. Most of the time, the numbers followed predictable patterns. But on that day, one line of data immediately caught his attention. Among the rows of ordinary signals, there was a sequence that stood out dramatically. It read 6xtuj5. To most people, the combination of letters and numbers meant nothing. But to Emin, it was astonishing. Each character represented the intensity of a radio signal detected by the telescope. Normally, signals from space appear as small variations in the data. But this sequence represented a sudden, extremely strong signal. In fact, it was about 30 times stronger than the normal background noise of space. Eamon was so surprised that he circled the sequence on the printout and wrote a single word in the margin. Wow. From that moment on, the mysterious transmission became known as the Wow signal. The signal had lasted for 72 seconds, which was exactly the amount of time the Big Ear telescope could observe a single point in the sky before Earth's rotation moved that location out of view. During those 72 seconds, the signal followed a pattern that looked very much like a transmission from an artificial source. It appeared to grow stronger as the telescope pointed directly at it, then fade away as the telescope's focus moved past. This was exactly the behavior scientists would expect from a signal coming from deep space. But the signal had another strange feature. It appeared at a frequency of 1420 megahertz. This frequency is significant because it corresponds to the natural emission line of hydrogen, the most abundant element in the universe. For decades, scientists had speculated that if extraterrestrial civilizations wanted to send signals across the galaxy, they might choose this frequency. It would be a natural place for intelligent beings to search for messages. So when the Wow signal appeared exactly in that frequency range, researchers became extremely interested. Could it have been a message from another civilization? The location of the signal in the sky pointed toward the constellation Sagittarius, near a region of space where many stars are clustered together. But there was a problem. The signal never appeared again. Scientists immediately began searching for it. They pointed radio telescopes toward the same area of the sky. They scanned the same frequency repeatedly, but the signal was gone. No matter how carefully they searched, they could not detect it again. Over the years, many attempts were made to explain the mysterious transmission. One possibility was that the signal had come from a satellite or spacecraft passing through the telescope's field of view. But at the time the signal was detected, no known satellites were transmitting at that frequency in that region of the sky. Another possibility was that the signal might have come from a natural astronomical phenomenon. But most natural radio signals from space do not behave the way the WOW signal did. They usually spread across a range of frequencies rather than appearing in such a narrow band, and they often repeat over time. The WOW signal appeared only once. Some researchers suggested that the signal might have come from a passing comet. Comets release clouds of hydrogen gas as they travel through space, which can sometimes produce radio emissions near the hydrogen frequency. But later studies suggested that such emissions would likely be far weaker than the signal detected in 1977. Other scientists proposed that the signal might have been caused by interference from Earth-based equipment. But this explanation also faced problems. The Big Ear telescope had been carefully designed to filter out local radio interference, and the signal's pattern matched the expected movement of an object in deep space rather than something located on Earth. In recent years, astronomers have continued searching the same region of space with more advanced technology. New radio telescopes have scanned the area many times, yet no signal matching the WOW signal has ever been detected again. The fact that the signal appeared only once makes it extremely difficult to study. If it had repeated even a few times, scientists could have analyzed it more carefully. They might have been able to determine its exact origin. But with only one brief event recorded, the mystery remains unsolved. Some researchers believe the signal may have come from a rare natural source that scientists simply do not yet understand. Others still consider the possibility that it could have been an intentional transmission from an advanced civilization. If that were the case, it raises even more questions. Why did the signal appear only once? Was it a deliberate message, or simply an accidental broadcast that happened to reach Earth? And if it truly came from another civilization somewhere in our galaxy, how far away might that civilization be? The distances between stars are enormous. A signal traveling at the speed of light can take hundreds or even thousands of years to cross the galaxy. It is possible that if the WOW signal came from an alien civilization, the beings who sent it may no longer even exist. But for many scientists involved in SETI, the signal remains one of the most intriguing clues ever discovered. It is a reminder that the universe is vast and largely unexplored, and somewhere among its billions of stars, intelligent life might be waiting. The Big Ear radio telescope that detected the signal was eventually dismantled in 1998 to make room for a golf course. But the search for extraterrestrial signals continues with newer, more powerful instruments. Radio telescopes across the world still scan the sky every night, listening, waiting, hoping that someday another signal like the WOW signal might appear. A signal that could answer one of humanity's oldest questions: are we alone in the universe? For now, the mysterious sequence of characters 6-second DUJ-5 remains a puzzle. A brief whisper from the depths of space, and perhaps the closest humanity has ever come to hearing a voice from the stars. The Voynich Manuscripted. The book no one can read in the quiet halls of rare book libraries and research institutions around the world. There are many ancient manuscripts filled with history, knowledge, and secrets from centuries past. But among them lies one book that has puzzled scholars, cryptographers, linguists, and historians for over 100 years. It is a book filled with writing that no one can read. A manuscript written in a language that does not exist anywhere else on Earth. Its pages are filled with strange drawings of plants that do not resemble any known species, illustrations of mysterious diagrams, Images of women bathing in strange pools connected by intricate networks of pipes and tubes, and page after page of flowing text written in a script that looks real but has never been successfully translated. The strange book is known as the Voynich manuscript, and to this day, no one knows what it says. The manuscript takes its name from Wilfrid Voynich, a rare book dealer who discovered the strange volume in 1912. Voynich purchased the book from a group of Jesuit monks in Italy who had kept it in their collection for centuries. From the moment he first examined the manuscript, Voynich realized he had found something extraordinary. The book was clearly very old. Its pages were made of vellum, a type of parchment produced from animal skin that was commonly used in medieval Europe. The writing was beautifully arranged in neat lines across each page, but the characters were unlike any known alphabet. The script consisted of looping, flowing shapes that resembled letters but did not match any known language. At first, Voynich believed the manuscript might contain a lost or secret code. Perhaps it had been written by a medieval alchemist or scientist attempting to hide dangerous knowledge. Or maybe it was a cryptographic message meant to conceal secrets from enemies. Voynich brought the manuscript to scholars and experts around the world. Many of the greatest cryptographers of the 20th century examined it. Some of the same experts who had broken complex military codes during both world wars studied the mysterious text, but none of them could decipher it. The Voynich manuscript appeared to follow the rules of language. Certain symbols repeated regularly. Words appeared to follow grammatical patterns, but despite years of analysis, no one could determine what the symbols meant. Eventually, scientists used radiocarbon dating to determine the age of the manuscript. The results showed that the parchment used to create the book dated back to around the early 15th century, between the years 1404 and 1438. This meant the manuscript was more than 600 years old, but knowing when the book was made only deepened the mystery: who had written it and why. The manuscript itself contains about 240 pages, although some pages appear to be missing. Scholars have divided the book into several sections based on the illustrations. The first section contains drawings of plants. At first glance, these appear to be botanical illustrations, possibly related to herbal medicine. But the plants themselves are strange. Many of them seem to be combinations of multiple species. Their shapes do not match any real plants known to science. The second section contains circular diagrams that resemble astronomical charts. Some pages show stars and zodiac symbols. Others include mysterious, rotating diagrams filled with text. The third section is perhaps the most bizarre. It contains images of dozens of small women bathing in green pools connected by a complex system of tubes and channels. Some researchers believe these images may represent medical treatments or alchemical processes. Others believe they might be symbolic representations of the human body. Another section appears to contain pharmaceutical recipes, with drawings of jars and plant roots. But once again, the text describing them remains completely unreadable. Over the decades, many theories have been proposed about the origin of the Voynich manuscript. Some believe it may have been created by medieval scientists or alchemists. During the Middle Ages, scholars often encoded their discoveries to protect their work from rivals. Perhaps the manuscript contains hidden scientific knowledge waiting to be unlocked. Others believe it may be a lost language created by a small group of scholars or monks. If a private language had been invented and used only within a specific community, it might explain why no one else recognizes the script. Another theory suggests the manuscript might actually be an elaborate hoax. Perhaps someone created a meaningless text designed to appear mysterious and valuable. In the 16th century, rare books were highly prized by wealthy collectors. If someone could produce a manuscript that looked ancient and mysterious, it might have been possible to sell it for a large sum of money. But if the manuscript were a hoax, it would be an incredibly sophisticated one. Modern computer analysis has shown that the structure of the text follows patterns similar to real languages. The words are distributed in ways that resemble natural speech. Certain characters appear more frequently than others, just as letters do in real alphabets. This suggests that the text may actually contain meaningful information. But if that is true, the code or language used to write it remains one of the most complex puzzles ever created. Some researchers have even suggested that the manuscript may represent an unknown form of shorthand, where each symbol represents an entire word rather than a single letter. Others believe the text may be encoded using a system that changes throughout the book, making it extremely difficult to decipher. In recent years, artificial intelligence and computer algorithms have been used to analyze the manuscript. Researchers have compared its patterns to hundreds of known languages. But even with modern technology, no definitive translation has been found. The Voynich manuscript remains locked in silence, its pages filled with words no one understands. The strange book is now housed at Yale University's Beinecke Rare Book Library, where it is carefully preserved under controlled conditions. Scholars continue to study it, hoping that one day the code will be broken. Perhaps a new discovery in linguistics or cryptography will provide the key. Or perhaps someone will stumble upon another document written in the same mysterious script. Until then, the Voynich manuscript remains one of history's greatest unsolved puzzles. A book written in a language that has no name. A message from the past that refuses to reveal its meaning. What secrets might be hidden within its pages? Medical knowledge, astronomical observations, ancient scientific discoveries, or something even stranger? For more than 6 centuries, the manuscript has waited patiently, its symbols flowing across parchment like whispers from another time. And somewhere within those pages, the truth still waits to be understood. The Hinterkaifeck murders. A farmhouse with no witnesses. In the spring of 1922, in the quiet countryside of southern Germany, a brutal crime took place on a small, isolated farm. What makes this case so disturbing is not only the violence of the murders, but the strange events that happened both before and after the crime. The victims were 6 members of the same household, all living on a farm called Hinterkaifeck, located near the village of Graubern in Bavaria. By the time the bodies were discovered, several days had already passed. And by then, whoever had committed the crime had vanished completely. But the most unsettling part of the story is that someone may have been living on the farm after the murders were committed, and no one ever found out who. The Hinterkaifeck farm lay about half a mile from the nearest village. It was surrounded by fields and forest, with only a narrow path connecting it to the outside world. The farm belonged to Andreas Gruber, a 63-year-old man who lived there with his wife Kazilia, their widowed daughter Victoria, Victoria's 2 young children, Kazilia, age 7, and Joseph, age 2, and a maid who had only recently started working at the farm. To outsiders, the family appeared quiet but somewhat isolated. Andreas Gruber had a reputation for being harsh and difficult, and the family kept mostly to themselves. Yet nothing about their lives suggested that a violent crime was about to occur. However, several weeks before the murders, strange things began happening around the farm. Andreas Gruber told neighbors that he had discovered footprints in the snow leading from the nearby forest toward the farmhouse. What troubled him was that the footprints stopped at the house. There were no tracks leading back into the woods. Someone had apparently approached the farm, but never left. At first he suspected a prank or a traveler passing through. But then other unusual events began to occur. One day he heard footsteps in the attic above the house. When he went to investigate, he found nothing. Another time, a newspaper appeared on the kitchen table that no one in the household recognized. It was from a nearby town, but none of the family members had purchased it. Then a set of keys went missing. Andreas searched the house and surrounding property but never found them. The family's previous maid had also left suddenly weeks earlier, claiming the house was haunted. She said she heard strange noises in the night and felt as if someone was watching the house from outside. At the time, her story sounded like superstition, but in hindsight, it seems much more unsettling. On the evening of March 31st, 1922, the new maid arrived at the farm for her first day of work. That night, one by one, members of the household were lured into the barn. Investigators later determined that Andreas, his wife Kazilia, their daughter Victoria, and the young girl Kazilia were all murdered there. The weapon used was believed to be a mattock, a farming tool similar to a pickaxe. Each victim suffered severe blows to the head. The attacks were violent and deliberate. But the horror did not end there. After the 4 bodies lay in the barn, the killer entered the farmhouse. Inside, he murdered 2-year-old Joseph, who was sleeping in his crib. The maid was also killed in her bedroom. 6 people had been murdered. And yet, no one in the nearby village heard anything. For several days, the murders went undiscovered. Neighbors eventually grew concerned when the family failed to appear at church. Young Kazilia did not show up for school, and the farm's mail remained uncollected. On April 4th, neighbors decided to check on the farm. What they found shocked them. The bodies of the 4 family members lay stacked in the barn, partially covered with hay. Inside the house, the maid's body was discovered in her room. Little Joseph was found in his crib. But the strangest discovery was yet to come. Evidence suggested that someone had continued living on the farm for several days after the murders. The animals had been fed. Fresh meals had been prepared in the kitchen. The chimney had been used. Someone had stayed behind after the crime. But by the time investigators arrived, that person had disappeared. Police launched a massive investigation. Hundreds of suspects were questioned. The crime scene itself offered several clues. Footprints were found in the snow around the farm, but the melting weather had destroyed many of the details. The murder weapon was discovered days later buried in the barn. It belonged to the farm, which suggested the killer had either known the property well or had been hiding there long enough to locate it. The brutality of the crime led investigators to believe the murderer may have had a personal connection to the family. But proving that connection turned out to be impossible. Over the years, several suspects emerged. One theory suggested that Carl Gabriel, Victoria's husband who had supposedly died during World War I, might still have been alive. Some villagers claimed they had seen him after the war ended. If he had returned secretly to the farm and discovered something that angered him, it might explain the violent attack. But there was no evidence confirming he had survived the war. Another suspect was a neighbor who had reportedly argued with Andreas Gruber over property disputes, but again, there was no solid proof. Some investigators even considered the possibility that someone had been secretly living in the attic before the murders occurred. The strange footsteps Andreas heard weeks earlier could suggest an intruder hiding in the house. If that person had been watching the family, they might have learned the layout of the property and waited for the right moment to strike. But despite extensive searches, no evidence of such a hidden resident was ever found. Perhaps the most disturbing element of the case remains the fact that the killer appeared to stay on the farm after committing the murders. Whoever it was had the confidence or the madness to remain in the house, surrounded by the bodies of 6 victims. They fed the animals, they cooked food, and then, at some point, they vanished. No one saw them leave. The investigation eventually faded without an arrest. But the mystery of Hinterkaifeck never disappeared. In fact, the case continues to fascinate historians and criminologists even today. Several modern investigations have attempted to analyze the evidence using modern forensic methods, but many crucial pieces of evidence were lost long ago. The farmhouse itself was demolished in 1923, 1 year after the murders. The materials from the building were reused to construct a shrine nearby, and the original crime scene no longer exists. More than 100 years later, the murders remain officially unsolved. No one knows exactly who committed the crime. No one knows why the victims were lured into the barn, and no one knows who continued living in the house afterward. The fields around Hinterkaifeck are quiet today. Farmers still work the land, and the village of Groburn remains a peaceful rural community. But the story of the isolated farmhouse and the 6 lives lost there has never been forgotten. It is remembered as one of the most chilling unsolved crimes in European history. A crime surrounded by strange warnings, unexplained events, and a killer who seemed to disappear into thin air. And perhaps the most haunting question of all remains unanswered. If someone was living in that house after the murders, where did they go? The Nazca Lines. Messages written across the desert in one of the driest places on Earth. Deep within the coastal desert of southern Peru, enormous shapes stretch across the ground for miles. From the surface, they appear almost meaningless. Thin lines carved into the reddish soil, long straight paths cutting through the barren landscape, strange geometric figures scattered across the desert floor. But when seen from the sky, these markings reveal something astonishing. Gigantic images of animals, birds, plants, and mysterious symbols appear across the desert. A hummingbird with wings stretched wide, a monkey with a spiraling tail, a spider drawn with delicate precision. Some of these figures are hundreds of feet long, others stretch for nearly a mile. And all of them were created more than 1,500 years ago by a civilization that had no known ability to fly. These are the Nazca Lines, one of the most extraordinary and puzzling archaeological mysteries ever discovered. The lines line the Nazca Desert, located about 250 miles south of Lima, Peru. The region is incredibly dry. Some areas have not received significant rainfall in thousands of years. Because of this, the ground has remained almost perfectly preserved. The lines themselves were created by removing the dark stones that covered the surface of the desert. Beneath those stones lies lighter-colored soil. By carefully moving the top layer aside, ancient people created lines that could be seen clearly against the desert floor. Over time, hundreds of these shapes were created. Some are simple straight lines that run across the desert for miles. Others form complex geometric patterns such as triangles, spirals, and trapezoids. But the most famous designs are the giant figures known as geoglyphs. These include drawings of animals such as monkeys, whales, dogs, lizards, and birds. One hummingbird figure measures about 300 feet from wingtip to wingtip. A pelican stretches nearly 900 feet across the desert floor. The spider figure is around 150 feet long. Even more remarkable is the precision of these designs. Despite their enormous size, the shapes are perfectly proportioned. The lines remain remarkably straight across long distances. Creating such enormous figures without being able to view them from above seems almost impossible. Yet the Nazca people managed to do exactly that. The Nazca civilization flourished in the region between approximately 200 BCE and 600 CE. They were skilled farmers who built irrigation systems to grow crops in the harsh desert environment. They produced beautiful pottery and textiles, many decorated with intricate designs. But it was their work on the desert floor that would leave one of the most mysterious legacies in human history. For centuries, the lines remained largely unnoticed. Travelers crossing the desert saw occasional markings on the ground, but their full scale was impossible to appreciate from the surface. It wasn't until the 1920s, when airplanes began flying over the region, that the true magnitude of the designs became visible. Pilots looking down from above suddenly realized they were seeing enormous drawings spread across the landscape. Soon archaeologists and scientists arrived to study the site. One of the first researchers to investigate the lines was Paul Kosok, an American historian who arrived in Peru in the 1930s. While studying ancient irrigation systems, Kosok noticed that many of the desert lines seemed to align with the setting sun during the winter solstice. This observation led him to propose an intriguing theory. Perhaps the Nazca lines formed part of a giant astronomical calendar. According to this idea, the ancient Nazca people might have used the lines to track the movements of the sun, moon, and stars. In a desert environment where rainfall was rare and unpredictable, understanding seasonal cycles would have been extremely important. By observing the positions of celestial bodies along the lines, the Nazca might have been able to predict the best times for planting crops or preparing for seasonal changes. Kosok's assistant, Maria Recci, spent decades studying the lines in detail. She mapped the designs, measured their angles, and dedicated her life to protecting the site. For many years, she strongly supported the astronomical theory, but as research continued, other scholars began proposing different explanations. Some researchers suggested that the lines may have served as ceremonial pathways used during religious rituals. Many of the straight lines are wide enough for groups of people to walk along. Perhaps the Nazca used them as part of spiritual processions meant to honor their gods. In ancient Nazca culture, water was extremely valuable. The desert environment made rainfall unpredictable, and droughts could threaten entire communities. Some archaeologists believe the lines may have been connected to rituals meant to bring rain or ensure fertile harvests. The animal figures might have represented sacred symbols or deities associated with water and fertility. Others have proposed that the lines were markers for underground water sources. The Nazca built impressive irrigation systems known as puquios, which allowed them to access hidden groundwater beneath the desert. Perhaps the lines pointed toward these vital water supplies. Despite decades of research, no single explanation has been universally accepted. The Nazca lines may have served multiple purposes at different times: astronomical observations, religious ceremonies, water-related rituals. All of these ideas remain possible. But the mystery does not end there, because the sheer scale and precision of the lines raise another fascinating question. How did the Nazca people create such enormous designs without being able to see them from the air? Some archaeologists believe the answer lies in simple surveying techniques. The Nazca could have used wooden stakes and ropes to map out their designs on the ground. By carefully measuring distances and angles, they could gradually construct the shapes piece by piece. Experiments conducted by researchers have shown that it is possible to recreate similar geoglyphs using basic tools and careful planning, but even with this explanation, the effort required would have been enormous. Some of the largest figures stretch for hundreds of feet. Maintaining accurate proportions across such distances would have required remarkable skill and organization, yet the Nazca accomplished it with impressive precision. Over time, more than 800 straight lines, 300 geometric shapes, and 70 animal figures have been identified across the Nazca Desert. And new discoveries continue to emerge. In recent years, drones and satellite imaging have revealed additional geoglyphs previously hidden beneath sand and rock. These discoveries show that the ancient artists of Nazca may have created far more designs than researchers originally realized. Of course, as with many ancient mysteries, more imaginative theories have also appeared. Some people have suggested that the Nazca lines were created as messages for extraterrestrial visitors. The enormous figures, visible only from the sky, have led some writers to speculate that the designs were meant to be seen by beings flying above the Earth. But archaeologists strongly reject this idea. There is no evidence of alien involvement. The tools and techniques used to create the lines are consistent with known methods available to ancient civilizations. Still, the idea has captured public imagination and inspired books, documentaries, and films. Whether viewed as sacred pathways, astronomical markers, or works of artistic expression, the Nazca lines remain one of the most remarkable achievements of ancient human creativity. For more than 15 centuries, the desert winds have blown gently across the Peruvian landscape, but the lines remain, protected by the dryness of the desert and the absence of heavy rainfall. Today, the Nazca lines are recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and efforts are underway to protect them from damage caused by modern development. Visitors can view some of the figures from observation towers or from aircraft flying above the desert. From the sky, the ancient designs reveal themselves in all their mysterious beauty, gigantic drawings stretching across the earth, lines pointing toward distant horizons, symbols whose meaning has long been lost to time. Who were the people who created them? What message were they trying to send, and what purpose did these enormous shapes truly serve? The answers may still lie buried beneath the sands of the Nazca Desert, but for now, the lines remain silent, a message written across the earth itself, waiting for someone to fully understand what the ancient artists were trying to say. The Bermuda Triangle. The ocean's most famous mystery for centuries, sailors have feared certain parts of the ocean. Storms, hidden reefs, and powerful currents have always made sea travel dangerous. But there is one region of the Atlantic Ocean that has captured the world's imagination more than any other, a place where ships have vanished, where aircraft have disappeared without explanation, where compasses behave strangely and radio signals fall silent, a region that many people now know as the Bermuda Triangle. The Bermuda Triangle is not marked on most official maps. It is not a formally recognized geographic region, but the area is generally considered to stretch between 3 points in the Atlantic Ocean: Miami, Florida, Bermuda, and San Juan, Puerto Rico. Together, these 3 locations form a vast triangular region of ocean covering roughly 500,000 square miles. It is one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world. Thousands of ships and airplanes pass through the region every year without incident, and yet for more than a century, reports of strange disappearances have emerged from these waters. Stories of vessels found abandoned, aircraft that vanished from radar, entire crews that disappeared without leaving behind any clues. Some of these stories have simple explanations, others remain deeply puzzling. And over time, the Bermuda Triangle has become one of the most famous mysteries on Earth. One of the earliest and most famous incidents occurred in 1918, when a massive U.S. Navy cargo ship named the USS Cyclops vanished while traveling through the region. The Cyclops was an enormous vessel, over 500 feet long, carrying a cargo of manganese ore from Brazil to Baltimore. On board were 309 crew members and passengers. The ship left Barbados in March of 1918 and was expected to arrive in Maryland within days, but it never did. No distress signal was received, no distress signal was received, no wreckage was ever found. The Cyclops simply disappeared somewhere in the Atlantic. Despite extensive searches, investigators never discovered what had happened to the ship. To this day, it remains the single largest loss of life in U.S. naval history not related to combat. Another famous incident occurred nearly 3 decades later. On December 5, 1945, 5 U.S. Navy training aircraft took off from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. The mission was routine. The aircraft, known as Flight 19, consisted of 5 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers used for navigation training. Each plane carried a crew of 3 men. The weather conditions were good, the pilots were experienced, and the training route had been flown many times before. But shortly after the exercise began, something strange happened. The flight leader reported that his compass was malfunctioning. Soon after, the other pilots also began experiencing navigational problems. Radio messages recorded during the flight revealed growing confusion among the pilots. They believed they were flying over the Florida Keys when in fact they were somewhere over the open Atlantic Ocean. As the hours passed, the situation worsened. The pilots could no longer determine their position. The sun began to set, and fuel levels began running dangerously low. The final message received from Flight 19 was chilling. One pilot reported, "Everything looks strange, even the ocean." After that, the radios went silent. The 5 aircraft never returned. A massive search operation began almost immediately. Dozens of ships and aircraft combed the region for survivors, but no wreckage was ever found. Even more mysteriously, one of the rescue aircraft sent to search for Flight 19 also disappeared. A PBM Mariner flying boat carrying 13 crew members vanished shortly after taking off. Altogether, 27 people disappeared that day, and none of them were ever recovered. Over the years, many other incidents have been linked to the Bermuda Triangle. In 1948, a passenger airplane named the Star Tiger disappeared while flying from the Azores to Bermuda. In 1949, another aircraft, the Star Ariel, vanished along a similar route. Both aircraft were carrying dozens of passengers. Both disappeared without sending distress signals, and neither was ever found. Ships have also vanished in the region under mysterious circumstances. In 1963, a tanker named the Marine Sulphur Queen disappeared while carrying molten sulfur across the Gulf of Mexico. The vessel had 39 crew members on board. Despite extensive searches, only a few scattered pieces of debris were ever discovered. No clear explanation for the ship's disappearance was ever confirmed. As these stories accumulated, the legend of the Bermuda Triangle began to grow. Writers and researchers started collecting accounts of unexplained disappearances in the region. Books published during the 1950s and 1960s introduced the idea that something unusual might be happening in that part of the ocean. Some researchers suggested that strange magnetic anomalies in the area might interfere with navigation equipment. Compasses sometimes behave unusually in certain regions of the world due to variations in the Earth's magnetic field. If pilots or sailors relied on faulty compass readings, they could easily become disoriented. Other scientists propose that powerful underwater methane gas eruptions might occasionally occur in the region. Methane gas trapped beneath the ocean floor can sometimes be released suddenly. If large amounts of gas rise to the surface, they can reduce the density of the water. A ship passing through such an area could potentially lose buoyancy and sink rapidly. Methane bubbles rising into the air could also disrupt aircraft engines flying overhead. Another possible explanation involves the region's powerful and unpredictable weather patterns. The Bermuda Triangle lies in a zone where tropical storms and hurricanes frequently develop. Sudden weather changes, powerful waves, and strong currents such as the Gulf Stream can make navigation extremely difficult. The Gulf Stream alone moves massive amounts of water at high speed. If a ship sinks in its path, wreckage can be carried away quickly, making it extremely difficult to locate. Some researchers argue that many Bermuda Triangle incidents have simply been the result of human error, bad weather, and mechanical failure. Over decades, stories of disappearances may have been exaggerated or misreported. Some incidents originally linked to the Bermuda Triangle were later found to have occurred outside the region entirely. But despite these explanations, the mystery continues to fascinate people. Because in several cases, the evidence truly is puzzling. Aircraft disappearing without distress signals, ships vanishing without leaving debris, navigational instruments behaving unpredictably, and in a few cases, vessels discovered drifting with no crew on board. Of course, as with many unsolved mysteries, more dramatic theories have also emerged. Some people believe the Bermuda Triangle may contain portals to other dimensions. Others suggest the presence of advanced alien technology hidden beneath the ocean floor. Another popular idea links the triangle to the lost civilization of Atlantis, suggesting that remnants of ancient technology might still be active beneath the sea. But scientists generally dismiss these ideas due to a lack of evidence. In reality, the Bermuda Triangle may simply be a region where natural dangers overlap. Busy shipping lanes, powerful ocean currents, unpredictable weather, and vast stretches of deep water where wreckage can easily disappear. Even today, modern ships and aircraft continue to pass safely through the region every day. The ocean itself remains unpredictable. But there is no scientific evidence that the Bermuda Triangle is more dangerous than other heavily traveled areas of the sea. And yet, the stories continue to capture our imagination, perhaps because the ocean still holds so many secrets. Beneath its surface lie vast, unexplored depths, shipwrecks resting on the seafloor, lost aircraft buried beneath layers of sand, and mysteries that may never be fully solved. The Bermuda Triangle remains one of the most famous unsolved legends in modern history, a place where ships vanished, where aircraft disappeared, and where the line between myth and reality continues to blur. Somewhere beneath the waves, the answers may still exist, but for now, the ocean keeps its secrets, and the legend of the Bermuda Triangle continues to drift through history like a ship lost at sea. The lost colony of Roanoke. The settlement that vanished in the late 16th century, long before the United States existed, England began searching for a way to establish permanent colonies in the New World. Explorers returned from across the Atlantic with stories of vast lands, rich forests, and endless possibilities. To the English crown, the Americas represented opportunity, a chance to expand power, trade, and influence beyond Europe. But one of the earliest attempts to build a permanent English settlement would end in one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in American history. An entire colony of settlers would vanish. Not a single body would ever be found, and the only clue left behind was a single word carved into wood. This is the mystery of the lost colony of Roanoke. The story begins in 1587, when a group of 115 English settlers arrived on the small island of Roanoke, located off the coast of what is now North Carolina. The colony was organized by Sir Walter Raleigh, an English explorer and supporter of overseas expansion. Raleigh hoped Roanoke would become the first permanent English settlement in North America. The colony included men, women, and children. Unlike earlier expeditions that focused on exploration, this group intended to build homes, grow crops, and create a lasting community. Among them was John White, the colony's governor. White was not only a leader, but also an artist and mapmaker who had previously traveled to the region. His detailed drawings of Native American villages and landscapes remain some of the earliest records of life in North America. The settlers arrived during a difficult time. Food supplies were limited. Relations with local Native American tribes were uncertain, and the colony was isolated from England by thousands of miles of ocean. Recognizing the growing need for supplies, the settlers asked Governor White to return to England and gather additional provisions. White agreed. He left the colony only a few weeks after its founding, promising to return as soon as possible. Before leaving, he witnessed an important moment in the colony's history. His daughter, Eleanor Dare, gave birth to a baby girl. The child was named Virginia Dare. She became the first English child born in the New World. But what should have been a hopeful beginning would soon become part of a much darker mystery. White sailed back to England in late 1587, but events beyond his control delayed his return. England soon became locked in conflict with Spain, and the threat of the powerful Spanish Armada forced the government to redirect ships and resources toward defense. Years passed before White was finally able to arrange a voyage back to Roanoke. By the time he returned in 1590, 3 long years had gone by. As his ship approached the island, White must have felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. He expected to find the colony waiting for him, families continuing the work they had started, children growing up in the new settlement. But when he stepped ashore, something was terribly wrong. The colony was empty. The houses had been dismantled. There were no signs of struggle, no bodies, no weapons scattered across the ground. It was as if the entire settlement had simply vanished. White and the crew searched the island carefully. They examined the remains of the village. They looked for any clues that might explain what had happened. Then they discovered something carved into a wooden post. The word Crossroom. Nearby, the letters CRO were also carved into a tree. At first, this seemed like a hopeful sign. Before leaving the colony years earlier, White had made an agreement with the settlers. If they ever needed to abandon the settlement, they would carve the name of their destination somewhere visible. If they had been forced to leave under threat or danger, they would carve a Maltese cross as a warning. But no such symbol appeared, only the word Croatoan. Croatoan was the name of a nearby island about 50 miles south of Roanoke, known today as Hatteras Island. It was also the name of a friendly Native American tribe that lived there. This discovery suggested that the colonists may have relocated to Croatoan. Perhaps they had joined the local tribe. Perhaps they had moved in search of better resources. White wanted to investigate immediately. But the weather turned against them. A powerful storm approached, forcing the ship to leave before they could sail to Croatoan Island. White was devastated. He returned to England without ever discovering the fate of his daughter, granddaughter, and the rest of the settlers. And despite later attempts to search the region, no expedition ever uncovered clear evidence of what happened to the colony. Over the centuries, many theories have been proposed. One possibility is that the settlers integrated with local Native American tribes. Some historians believe they may have joined the Croatoan people and gradually blended into the local population. Early reports from explorers in later decades described Native Americans with gray eyes or European features, which some believed might indicate mixed ancestry. Another theory suggests the settlers may have attempted to relocate inland in search of food and better farmland. The early years of colonization were extremely difficult. Droughts, limited supplies, and unfamiliar environments made survival challenging. It is possible that the settlers abandoned Roanoke and traveled inland, where they eventually died or joined other communities. Some historians believe the colony may have been attacked by a hostile tribe, but this theory has little supporting evidence. If a violent attack had occurred, investigators would likely have found signs of struggle or destruction. Instead, the settlement appeared to have been carefully dismantled, suggesting the colonists left intentionally. Modern archaeology has uncovered a few possible clues. Excavations in parts of North Carolina have revealed English artifacts dating back to the late 1500s. Some researchers believe these objects may have belonged to members of the Roanoke colony. But none of these discoveries provide a definitive answer. The mystery remains unsolved. What we do know is that 115 settlers disappeared from Roanoke Island sometime between 1587 and 1590. They left behind no written records, no clear evidence of their journey, only the mysterious word carved into wood, Croatoan. Today, the story of the lost colony of Roanoke remains one of the earliest unsolved mysteries in American history, a colony that vanished, families who were never seen again, and a mystery that has endured for more than 4 centuries. Somewhere in the forests and coastal lands of North Carolina, the truth may still be waiting. But for now, the fate of the Roanoke settlers remains one of history's most haunting, unanswered questions. Throughout history, humanity has always searched for answers. We build telescopes to look deeper into space. We send submarines into the darkest parts of the ocean. We dig through ancient ruins and analyze forgotten manuscripts, hoping to understand the past. And yet, despite all our technology and knowledge, the world is still filled with mysteries. Tonight, we explored some of the strangest ones. From ships sailing without crews across the open ocean, to hikers vanishing in the frozen mountains of Russia, from unexplained signals arriving from deep space, to ancient drawings stretching across entire deserts. Each mystery leaves us with the same question: what really happened? Take the Dyatlov Pass incident. 9 experienced hikers fled their tent in the middle of the night into freezing temperatures, cutting their way out from the inside. Some were found with severe internal injuries, others died of exposure, and one was missing her tongue. Decades later, investigators still debate what forced them out of their shelter. An avalanche? Military experiments? Or something we still don't fully understand? Then there's the haunting story of the Mary Celeste, a ship discovered drifting across the Atlantic Ocean. The sails were set, the cargo was untouched. The crew's belongings were still neatly packed, but every single person on board had vanished. No distress signal, no struggle, no explanation. Even today, the ocean has never given up the answer. And what about the WOW signal? A powerful radio transmission detected by a telescope in 1977, appearing for only 72 seconds before disappearing forever. Was it a natural cosmic event? Or was it a brief whisper from somewhere else in the galaxy? A signal sent across unimaginable distances, reaching Earth by pure chance. Then there are the mysteries left behind by ancient civilizations. The Nazca lines, carved across the Peruvian desert more than 1,500 years ago. Massive drawings so large they can only be fully seen from the sky. A hummingbird hundreds of feet long, a monkey with a spiraling tail, lines stretching for miles across the desert floor. Who made them? And why create art meant to be seen from the heavens? Perhaps the answer lies in rituals lost to time, or perhaps the message was meant for something watching from above, and the world still holds mysteries even closer to home. The lead mask's case in Brazil. 2 men found dead on a hill, wearing strange metal masks and carrying a note filled with cryptic instructions. 1630 B at the specified location. 1830 ingest capsules. Wait for mask signal. No one knows what they were waiting for, or what they believed was coming. And of course there is the legend of the Bermuda Triangle, where ships and aircraft have vanished into the vast Atlantic Ocean. Some of these disappearances can be explained by weather, navigation errors, or the powerful Gulf Stream currents, but others remain puzzling. Stories of vessels found abandoned, pilots reporting strange lights or compass failures, and flights that disappeared from radar without leaving any trace. Some mysteries may eventually be solved. New technology might uncover lost shipwrecks deep beneath the ocean floor. Advanced satellites might detect clues hidden beneath forests or deserts. Artificial intelligence might one day decode ancient languages like the Voynich manuscript, but some mysteries may remain unsolved forever. Because the world is far larger and more complex than we often realize. Even today, more than 80% of the ocean remains unexplored. Entire ecosystems exist in the darkness beneath the sea. Hidden caves stretch for miles beneath mountains, and the universe above us contains billions of galaxies we have barely begun to study. In a world so vast, it should not surprise us that some questions remain unanswered. In fact, these mysteries remind us of something important. There are still discoveries waiting to be made. Still secrets hidden in the shadows of history. Still stories buried beneath the sands of time. And perhaps one day someone watching this video might be the person who solves one of them. A scientist studying an ancient manuscript. An explorer discovering a forgotten shipwreck. Or an astronomer detecting a signal from somewhere far beyond our solar system. The next great discovery could come from anywhere, because curiosity has always been one of humanity's greatest strengths. It drives us to explore, to question, to search for answers where others see only darkness. And sometimes the journey itself becomes just as fascinating as the answer, because every mystery reminds us that the world still holds wonder, still holds secrets, still holds questions waiting to be asked. If you enjoyed exploring these mysteries, make sure to like the video so more people can discover it. And if you're fascinated by unexplained stories, ancient mysteries, and strange events from history, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more deep dives just like this. But now I'm curious about something. Which mystery do you think is the most unsettling? Was it the hikers at Dyatlov Pass? The ghost ship Mary Celeste? The signal from deep space? Or one of the other mysteries we explored tonight? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, because sometimes the best theories come from the people who refuse to stop asking questions. And who knows, the next great explanation might already be waiting there. For thousands of years, humanity has tried to ocean stone the world around us. We build cities, study the stars, explore the oceans, and dig through the ruins of ancient civilizations, searching for clues about the past. Yet, no matter how much we discover, the world continues to surprise us. History is not simply a collection of solved puzzles. It is filled with questions that still echo through time. Some of those questions have lingered for centuries. Others appeared only recently, leaving investigators and historians struggling to piece together fragments of evidence. But all of them share one thing in common. They remind us that the world is still full of mysteries. Tonight we traveled through centuries of strange events and unexplained stories. From forgotten colonies and ghost ships drifting across empty seas, to signals from deep space that may have traveled across the galaxy before reaching Earth. Each mystery left behind traces of something unusual. Sometimes it was a strange message carved into wood. Sometimes it was a ship discovered with no crew. Sometimes it was a radio signal that lasted only 72 seconds before disappearing forever. And sometimes the clues were buried deep in deserts, mountains, or frozen wilderness. Take the story of the lost colony of Roanoke. More than 4 centuries ago, an entire community vanished from the shores of North America. When their governor returned, he found the settlement empty. No signs of struggle, no remains, only a single word carved into wood: Croatoan. Was it a clue, a destination, or something else entirely? Historians have searched for answers for generations, but the final fate of the colonists remains unknown. Then there was the Mary Celeste, a ship discovered drifting across the Atlantic Ocean with its cargo intact, its sails still set, and its supplies untouched. But its crew had vanished. No lifeboats, no signs of violence, no clear explanation. The ship continued its silent journey across the sea as if nothing had happened. But the people who sailed it were never seen again. Mysteries like these have fascinated people for centuries, because they challenge the way we think about the world. They remind us that even in an age of satellites and scientific discovery, there are still events that refuse to be explained. Consider the strange signal detected in 1977 by a radio telescope in Ohio. For 72 seconds, a powerful transmission appeared in the data, strong, precise, unlike anything scientists had recorded before. A researcher studying the printout circled the signal and wrote a single word beside it: "Wow." To this day, no one knows exactly where that signal came from. It never appeared again. Was it a rare cosmic event? Or could it have been a message sent across the galaxy by an intelligent civilization? The universe is vast beyond imagination. Our own galaxy contains hundreds of billions of stars, and beyond that lie countless other galaxies stretching across the observable universe. Somewhere in that enormous expanse, other worlds may exist. Worlds where civilizations have risen and fallen long before humanity appeared on Earth. If one of those civilizations attempted to communicate, would we even recognize the message? Or would it pass through our instruments unnoticed? Perhaps the signal was nothing more than a natural phenomenon. But perhaps it was something else, a whisper from the cosmos that arrived briefly before fading back into the silence of space. Here on Earth, the mysteries continue. Across the deserts of Peru, enormous drawings stretch across the ground. The Nazca lines, giant shapes of birds, animals, and geometric patterns that can only be fully seen from the sky. They were created more than 1,500 years ago by a civilization that had no known method of flight. Why did they create them? Were they ceremonial pathways? Astronomical markers? Messages meant for gods watching from above? No one knows for certain. The people who created them left behind the drawings, but not their explanations. In the frozen mountains of Russia, the mystery of the Dyatlov Pass still puzzles investigators. 9 experienced hikers fled their tent in the middle of the night into freezing temperatures. Their shelter had been cut open from the inside. Some of the hikers were found miles away with severe injuries. Others died of exposure. The official explanation was vague, an unknown compelling force. But what force could have driven them into the deadly cold? Avalanche? Panic? Something they saw in the darkness? Even today, the true cause of their actions remains uncertain. And then there are the mysteries of the sea, stories of ships disappearing in the vast waters of the Atlantic, aircraft vanishing from the sky, compasses spinning without explanation. The Bermuda Triangle has become one of the most famous legends in maritime history. Scientists point to storms, powerful currents, and navigational errors as likely explanations, and in many cases they may be correct. But the ocean is enormous. It covers more than 70% of our planet, and even now, much of it remains unexplored. Entire mountain ranges exist beneath the surface of the sea. Canyons deeper than the Grand Canyon stretch across the ocean floor. In those dark depths, countless shipwrecks lie hidden. Stories frozen in time beneath layers of sand and salt water. Perhaps some of the answers we seek are resting there, waiting to be discovered, but until they are found, the mysteries remain. And perhaps that is part of what makes them so fascinating. Mysteries invite us to imagine. They challenge us to think beyond the boundaries of what we already know. They remind us that history is not always neat and orderly. Sometimes it is incomplete. Sometimes it leaves behind gaps where the truth should be. But those gaps are not empty. They are filled with possibilities. Every unsolved mystery is an invitation to explore, to investigate, to search for the missing pieces of the story. Throughout history, many mysteries that once seemed impossible to solve have eventually revealed their secrets. Ancient languages have been deciphered. Lost cities have been uncovered. Shipwrecks once thought lost forever have been found beneath the sea. The process of discovery never truly ends. With every generation, new technologies allow us to look deeper into the past. Satellites scan the surface of the Earth for hidden ruins. Submersibles explore the deepest parts of the ocean. Artificial intelligence analyzes patterns in ancient texts. Perhaps one day some of the mysteries we explored tonight will finally be solved. Perhaps historians will uncover new documents that reveal the fate of the Roanoke settlers. Perhaps explorers will discover the wreckage of long-lost ships buried beneath the ocean floor. Perhaps astronomers will detect another signal from the stars, one that can be studied and understood. Or perhaps some mysteries will remain unsolved forever. Because history, like the universe itself, is vast and complicated. And the deeper we explore it, the more we realize how much we still have to learn. But that is not something to fear. It is something to celebrate, because the unknown is what drives curiosity. It pushes us to keep asking questions, to keep exploring, to keep searching for answers. Every mystery we encounter is a reminder that the world is still full of wonder, that the past still holds secrets, and that somewhere out there, discoveries are waiting to be made. Maybe the answers to some of these mysteries already exist, hidden in forgotten archives, buried beneath ancient ruins, or resting quietly on the floor of the ocean. All it takes is the right person asking the right question at the right moment. And perhaps someday, someone watching this video will be that person. The one who discovers the clue that changes everything. The one who finally solves a mystery that has puzzled the world for centuries. Until then, the stories remain, the questions remain, and the mysteries continue to wait patiently for the day their secrets are finally revealed. Call to action. If you enjoyed exploring these mysteries, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more fascinating stories from history. And now I'd love to hear from you. Which mystery do you think is the most puzzling? The lost colony of Roanoke? The ghost ship Mary Celeste? The strange wow signal from deep space? Or something else entirely? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Because sometimes the best ideas come from people who refuse to stop asking questions. And who knows, the next great discovery might begin with a single question. Just like the ones that started these mysteries centuries ago.